When loving someone means losing everything, would you still choose them? Tonight, I'm taking you deep into Salt River Canyon, a place where the earth runs red and hearts break harder than stone. This is the story of Kyle Redhawk and Eliza Whitford, an Apache hunter and a rancher's daughter whose love became an act of war against an entire world. What you're about to hear isn't just forbidden romance, it's survival, defiance, and the price two souls paid to rewrite their destiny. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The canyon didn't forgive weakness. Kyle Redhawk knew that truth the way he knew the weight of his rifle, the pattern of the stars, the exact moment when deer would come to water at dawn. The land had taught him survival before he could walk, taught him that softness got you killed, that trust was a luxury, that the world beyond the canyon walls wanted him dead or invisible. He preferred invisible. At 28, Kyle moved through the wilderness like smoke, silent, deliberate, leaving no trace. His grandfather had raised him after the wars, after the soldiers, after everything that could break a people had tried and nearly succeeded. The old man's hands had been gnarled as mesquite roots, but steady enough to teach a boy how to read animal tracks in dust, how to find water in stone, how to become a shadow when white men rode too close. "We are the last free thing in this canyon," his grandfather used to say, eyes fixed on the horizon where the mesas turned purple at sunset. "Don't give them reason to remember we're here." Cale had learned that lesson well. He hunted alone, traded rarely, bringing venison and hides to the Mexican trader 40 miles south, who asked no questions and paid fair prices. He built his cabin in a box canyon so hidden that even eagles would miss it on the first pass, tucked beneath an overhang of red rock where ancient handprints still marked the stone. His nearest neighbor was the wind, and for years that had been enough. The first time he saw Eliza Whitford, she was crying. It was late September, the kind of afternoon when the heat finally broke and the cottonwoods along the creek burned gold in the slanting light. Kyle had been tracking an elk for 3 days, following it deep into territory he usually avoided. Too close to the Whitford ranch, too close to people who would see his presence as trespassing at best, threat at worst. But the elk had other ideas, and Kyle's winter stores were running low. He just found where the animal had bedded down in a thicket of willow when he heard it, the sound of someone trying very hard not to make noise while falling apart. Soft, hitching breaths, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than tears. Every instinct told him to leave, to slip back into the trees and let whoever it was work through their private grief without an audience, especially if that whoever was white, and especially if they were on Whitford land. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the particular quality of that sound, not fear, but heartbreak. Maybe it was the way the afternoon light caught in the cottonwood leaves, making the whole world feel suspended between moments. Maybe he was just tired of being invisible. Kyle moved forward, silent as thought. She sat with her back against a massive cottonwood, knees drawn up, face buried in her arms. Dark hair had come loose from its pins and fell in waves around her shoulders. Her dress was well made but practical, deep blue cotton, dusty at the hem, the kind of thing a woman wore when she actually worked instead of just supervising work. He should have left. Instead, he heard himself speak. "You're bleeding." She jerked upright so fast she cracked her head against the tree trunk, one hand flying to the rifle that wasn't there. Her eyes, gray as storm clouds, went wide when she saw him standing 10 feet away, rifle lowered but still in his hands. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Kyle watched her take him in, the long black hair tied back with leather cord, the buckskin shirt and worn denim, the face that marked him as Apache before he ever opened his mouth. He watched her calculate distance, threat, whether she could run. "Your hand," he said quietly, nodding toward where blood dripped from her palm. "You cut it on something." She looked down as if surprised to find herself injured, then back up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly. Wariness, yes. But something else underneath, a kind of exhausted curiosity, as if she'd run out of energy for the expected reactions. She stopped, seeming to realize how absurd any explanation would sound. Her voice was rougher than he'd expected, shaped by wind and work rather than parlor conversation. The fence wire snapped. I wasn't paying attention. You're a long way from the ranch house. So are you. Not quite a challenge, but not quite acceptance either. The corner of Kael's mouth twitched. I was tracking an elk. On my father's land. Elk don't respect property lines. Neither do you, apparently. They stared at each other, and something unexpected happened. She smiled. Just a flicker, gone almost before it registered, but real enough that Kael felt something shift in his chest. A crack in the careful wall he'd built between himself and the world. I won't tell if you won't, she said. Tell what? That I was out here crying like an idiot instead of fixing fence line. That you were hunting where Thomas Whitford would shoot you on sight if he knew. She wiped her face with her uninjured hand, leaving a smear of dust across her cheek. Seems like we both have reasons to keep this meeting quiet. Kael knew he should agree and disappear. Instead, he found himself crouching down and pulling a strip of clean cloth from his pack. Let me see your hand. She hesitated, then extended it. The cut wasn't deep, but it was dirty, the kind of wound that could fester if left alone. Kael worked quickly, cleaning it with water from his canteen and binding it with efficient movements that came from years of dressing his own injuries in the field. Her hands were smaller than his, but strong, marked with calluses that spoke of real work, not the soft hands of a woman who spent her days in drawing rooms. These were hands that knew rope and leather, that had mended fence and mucked stalls and done whatever needed doing. You're good at this, she said quietly. I've had practice. Living alone out here? Among other things. She watched his face as he worked, and Kael felt the weight of that gaze like physical touch. He'd spent so long being invisible that being truly seen, looked at not as threat or curiosity, but as simply human, felt almost painful. What's your name? She asked. He should have lied, should have given her nothing that could trace back to him. Kael? I'm Eliza, she paused. Though you probably already knew that. Whitford's daughter, yes. The difficult one, according to my father. The one who should have been born a son. There was no bitterness in her voice, just stating fact. What do they call you? In town, I mean. When they talk about the Apache who lives in the canyon like a ghost. They don't talk about me. I make sure of it. Everyone talks about everyone in a town that small, even the ghosts. Kael finished tying off the bandage and released her hand, rocking back on his heels. The sun had shifted, sending shafts of golden light through the cottonwood canopy. Somewhere downstream, a canyon wren called out its descending scale of notes, wild and pure. Why were you crying? The question surprised him as much as her. Eliza looked away, toward where the creek ran shallow over smooth stones. My father wants me to marry Marcus Brennan. Kael knew the name. Everyone within 100 miles knew Marcus Brennan. Wealthy rancher, ex-cavalry officer, the kind of man who spoke of taming the frontier as if it were a wild horse to be broken, rather than a living thing to be understood. And you don't want to. I don't want to be a prize mare in his stable. She turned back to him, and there was fire in those gray eyes now. I don't want to spend my life hosting dinner parties and pretending I don't see him with the Mexican girls who work in his kitchen. I don't want to smile and nod while he talks about Indians like they're vermin to be cleared out so decent people can prosper. The last part came out with such vehemence that Kael felt something warm kindle in his chest. Dangerous thing, warmth. It made you careless. What do you want? He asked. I want... She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter what I want. My father needs the alliance with the Brennans. Their combined herds would make us the largest ranch operation in the territory. And I'm the price of that alliance. You could refuse. And go where? Do what? Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm 24 years old. In their eyes, I'm already halfway to being a spinster. My mother's dead, my father needs sons to help run the ranch, and I'm the consolation prize he's trying to trade for something useful. Kael stood slowly, shouldering his rifle. Every bit of wisdom his grandfather had given him was screaming to leave, to let this woman and her problems fade back into the world he'd chosen to leave behind. But he heard himself say, "You're not a prize, and you're not a consolation." Eliza looked up at him, something vulnerable and surprised flickering across her face. How do you know? Because prizes don't fight back, and you've got fight in you. I can see it. For a long moment, they stood there in the golden light, the sound of the creek running between them. Then Eliza rose, brushing dust from her skirt. Thank you for the hand. It'll heal clean if you keep it dry. I will. She started to turn away, then stopped. Your elk went north, by the way, crossed the creek about a quarter-mile up and headed for the high country. Big bull, 6 points at least. Cale felt his eyebrows rise. You saw it? I see most things that move through here. My father thinks I'm fixing fence, but mostly I'm just... She gestured vaguely at the canyon, the sky, the endless sweep of wilderness. Out here, away from all the things I'm supposed to be. I know that feeling. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that comes when two people who've learned to live in the margins find each other there, unexpected and impossible. Will you be here again? Eliza asked, and there was a carefulness in how she said it that told Cale the question mattered more than it should. He knew what the smart answer was, the safe answer. Maybe, he said instead. She smiled, a real smile this time, full and bright as the afternoon sun. Then maybe I'll see you. And she walked away, back toward the ranch lands, leaving Cale standing alone beneath the cottonwoods, wondering what the hell he'd just started. 3 days later, he came back. He told himself it was because the elk had led him this way again, that it was just coincidence he happened to check his snare line along the creek near the cottonwood grove, that he certainly wasn't hoping to see a flash of dark hair and a blue dress against the green. Eliza was already there, sitting on a flat rock with her boots off and her feet in the water. Took you long enough, she called out when she saw him. I've been busy. Busy avoiding people? It's a full-time job. She laughed, and the sound startled a pair of doves from the willows. Cale found himself walking toward her without quite deciding to, drawn by something he didn't have words for yet. Did you get your elk? She asked. 2 days ago, up in the high meadows, just like you said. Good. I'd hate to think I gave bad information. She patted the rock beside her. Sit. Unless you're too busy being mysterious and solitary. He should have kept moving. Should have checked his snares and disappeared back into the canyon. Instead, he found himself settling onto the sun-warmed stone, close enough that he could smell the sage and honey scent of her hair. They sat in silence for a while, watching the water run clear over colored stones. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling with empty words. Cale had forgotten that silence could feel like this, companionable rather than lonely. Tell me about the canyon, Eliza said eventually. The parts no one else sees. Why? Because you know it, really know it, not just as property to be claimed or resources to be extracted. She pulled her feet from the water, tucking them under her skirt. I've lived here all my life, but I feel like I'm only seeing the surface. You move through it like you're part of it. Cale considered her for a long moment, trying to decide how much truth to offer. My grandfather taught me to read the land like text, he said finally. Every track, every bent grass blade, every shifted stone tells a story. The canyon isn't empty. It's full of voices if you know how to listen. Teach me. To track? To listen. And so he did. It started as a kind of game, Cale pointing out the subtle signs that marked the wilderness, Eliza learning to see what had always been invisible to her. The places where deer bedded down in the sage. The scratches on tree bark where bears marked territory. The way certain birds only sang at specific times, announcing weather changes hours before humans could sense them. But it became more than that. It became afternoons stolen from their separate lives, hours carved out of time where they could be something other than what the world demanded. They met by unspoken agreement, never planned, never promised, but somehow always finding each other in that grove of cottonwoods where the creek ran shallow and the light fell gold. Eliza brought him books sometimes, worn volumes of poetry and philosophy she'd read so many times the spines were cracked white. Cale, who'd taught himself to read from his grandfather's Bible in a water-damaged almanac, discovered worlds he'd never known existed in those pages. He brought her the canyon's secrets, eagle nests hidden in cliff faces, springs that ran year-round in the deep stone, petroglyphs left by his ancestors in sheltered overhangs, where the old ones had painted their dreams onto rock. They talked about everything and nothing, about her mother who died when Eliza was 12, teaching her daughter to ride and shoot and hold her ground before she went, about his grandfather who'd survived 3 wars and died quietly in his sleep, leaving Kyle alone at 16 with nothing but skills and silence, about the weight of other people's expectations and the impossible price of freedom. "Do you ever get lonely?" Eliza asked one afternoon, lying in the grass while Kyle showed her how to identify clouds that would bring rain. "Sometimes. But you choose it anyway. It's safer than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" He looked down at her, at the way the sunlight caught in her dark hair and made her eyes more silver than gray. "Caring about people who will be taken away." Eliza held his gaze, something fierce and sad moving across her face. "That's not living, KL. That's just not dying." "Sometimes that's the same thing." "No." She sat up, close enough now that he could count the faint freckles across her nose. "Living is this, right here, being scared and doing it anyway." Doing what? But he knew what. Could feel it in the air between them, electric as the moment before lightning strikes. Could see it in the way her breath had gone shallow, in the way his own pulse was hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. Eliza. Her name in his mouth felt dangerous. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't tell me all the reasons this is impossible. I already know them." "Then you know we can't." "Can't what? Can't feel what we feel? Too late." She reached up, fingers trembling as they touched his face. "I tried not to. I swear I tried. But every time I go home, all I can think about is when I can come back here. Back to you." Cale closed his eyes, every instinct at war with every desire. He'd survived this long by being smart, by being careful, by never wanting anything he couldn't walk away from. But when he opened his eyes and saw Eliza looking at him like he was worth the risk, like he was worth everything, all that careful wisdom turned to dust. "This will destroy you," he said hoarsely. "You know that. Your father, the town, all of it, they'll turn you into nothing for this. Then I'll be nothing with you." She smiled, sad and certain. "I spent 24 years trying to be what they wanted. Let me have this. Let me have something that's just mine." And he was lost. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid the other might disappear if they pushed too hard. But then Eliza made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and Kyle felt the last of his resistance crumble. She tasted like creek water and wild honey, like every reckless thing he'd ever wanted and never let himself have. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eliza laughed, bright and a little desperate. "We're insane," she said. "Completely. My father would kill you. Probably. The whole town would turn on me. Definitely. And you still kissed me." Kyle tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering against her cheek. "You kissed me first." "So I did." She leaned into his touch, eyes drifting closed. "What do we do now?" "I don't know." "Lie to me," she whispered. "Tell me this can work. Tell me we can figure it out." He wanted to promise her everything would be fine, that love was enough, that they could build something real in a world determined to tear them apart. But Kyle had learned young that pretty lies got people killed. "I can't promise you it'll work," he said instead. "I can't promise you anything except that I'll try. That I'm here, right now, and that's real even if nothing else is." Eliza opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. "Then that's enough," she said. "For now, that's enough." The weeks that followed existed outside of time. They met in secret, in places the canyon kept hidden from the world. Sometimes it was the cottonwood grove. Sometimes the high meadows where wildflowers turned the ground into living color. Sometimes a box canyon Kyle knew where the walls echoed back their voices and made them feel like the only 2 people alive. They were careful. Eliza varied her routes, made excuses about fence lines and water sources that needed checking. Kyle moved through the wilderness like smoke, leaving no trail anyone could follow. But careful or not, what they had was too real to hide completely. Kyle found himself smiling at nothing, at the memory of how Eliza laughed, head thrown back and completely unguarded, at the way she'd memorized the constellations he showed her and made up stories about them that had nothing to do with the old myths, at how she could spend an hour just watching him work, learning the small movements that meant tracking or fire starting, or the dozen other skills that kept him alive. Eliza started wearing her hair loose more often, stopped pretending to care about the social graces her father's world demanded. When Marcus Brennan came calling with his practiced charm and entitled assumption, she looked through him like he was glass. "You're different," her father said one night at dinner, studying her with suspicious eyes. "I'm exactly who I've always been," Eliza replied calmly. "You're just noticing." "Don't get clever with me, girl. Brennan's been patient, but he won't wait forever." "Good. Then he can stop waiting and marry someone who wants him." Thomas Whitford's fist hit the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. "You'll marry who I tell you to marry. This isn't about what you want. It's about this ranch, this family, our future." "Your future," Eliza said quietly. "Not mine." She left before he could respond, walking out into the night where the stars burned cold and clear above the canyon rim. And she kept walking, through the dark, through the rough country, until she found the small fire burning in the hidden box canyon where Kyle was waiting. He took one look at her face and opened his arms. Eliza fell into them, shaking but not crying. She was done crying. "He knows something's different," she said against Kyle's chest. "He doesn't know what, but he suspects." "Then stop coming here. It's too dangerous." She pulled back, eyes fierce in the firelight. "No." "Eliza's No," she repeated. "I'm not giving this up. I'm not giving you up. Not for him, not for the ranch, not for any of it." "You don't know what you're risking." "Then tell me." She gripped his shirt, holding on like he might vanish. "Tell me exactly what happens if we keep doing this. Tell me the worst of it." Cale looked at her, this woman who'd somehow become his whole world in the space of a few stolen weeks, and forced himself to speak the truth. "Your father finds out, he comes for me. Maybe with the law, maybe not. Either way, I'm dead or disappeared." His voice was flat, factual. He can't kill, but he can cut you off. No money, no home, no protection. The town follows his lead, so they turn on you too. No one will hire you, help you, even speak to you, and if you stay with me, he touched her face gently, you'll live the way I live. Hard, hungry sometimes, cold in winter, always watching over your shoulder for someone to decide we're too different, too wrong, too much of a threat. Is that supposed to scare me? It should. Well, it doesn't. Eliza's smile was small and fierce. You want to know what scares me? Going back to that house and pretending this never happened. Marrying Marcus Brennan and dying slowly inside while I smile and play the rancher's wife. That scares me. This? She gestured between them. This is the first time I've felt alive in years. Kyle pulled her close again, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feeling of her in his arms, because some part of him knew, had known from the first moment he'd seen her crying under that cottonwood, that this couldn't last. I love you, he said into the darkness, the words raw and unused. I don't know when it happened or how to stop it, but I do. Eliza went very still, then tilted her head back to look at him. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Eliza Whitford, and it's going to ruin us both. She kissed him then, slow and deep and certain. Then let it, she whispered against his mouth. Let it ruin everything. And for that one perfect night, with the fire burning low and the stars wheeling overhead, they let themselves believe that love could be enough, that the world could be kind, that they could find a way. They couldn't. The end began on a cold October morning when Thomas Whitford sent two of his ranch hands to find his daughter and drag her home. They found her horse tied near the cottonwood grove. They found tracks, 2 sets, one wearing boots, one wearing moccasins. They found the place where 2 people had sat close together, where the grass was pressed down in ways that told its own story. They went back and told Whitford what they'd seen. The rancher stood on his porch, face carved from stone, while his daughter came home at sunset with leaves in her hair and eyes that looked somewhere past him into a future he couldn't see. "Inside," he said. "Now." Eliza walked past him without a word, and Thomas Whitford felt something crack in his chest, the last piece of the daughter he'd thought he knew. When the door closed behind them, he turned to face her. "It's the Apache, isn't it? That ghost everyone whispers about." Eliza met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "His name is Kyle." I don't care what his name is." Thomas's control shattered. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've fallen in love with a good man." "A good man?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "He's a savage living in the rocks. He has nothing, no land, no prospects, no future. What kind of life can he give you?" "A real one." "Real?" Thomas grabbed her shoulders, searching her face for some sign of the sensible girl he'd raised. "You think love is enough? You think it'll feed you when winter comes and there's no food? You think it'll protect you when the town turns on you for lying with a— Don't," Eliza cut him off, voice like ice. "Don't say it. Whatever word you're thinking, swallow it." They stared at each other, and Thomas saw something in his daughter's eyes he'd never seen before. Not defiance, but certainty. The kind of certainty that couldn't be reasoned with or threatened away. "You've been with him," he said quietly. "Haven't you?" Eliza lifted her chin. "Yes." The word hung between them like a gunshot. Thomas released her, stepping back. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. "Then it's already too late. You've ruined yourself, girl. No decent man will have you now." "Good. I don't want a decent man. I want Kyle." "And when he's gone? When winter comes and he disappears into the canyon because that's what his kind does? When you're left alone, pregnant maybe, with nothing?" Thomas shook his head. "That's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, someone sees you together and decides to solve the problem with a rope and a tree. Then what?" "Then I'd rather die with him than live without him." Thomas Whitford looked at his daughter, his difficult, stubborn, impossible daughter who'd never learned to bend, and felt something inside him break. "Get out," he said softly. Eliza went very still. "What?" "Get out of my house. You've made your choice, so live with it." He turned away, unable to look at her. "Take whatever you can carry. Be gone by morning, and don't come back." For the first time, Eliza's certainty wavered. "Father, I don't have a daughter anymore." Thomas's voice cracked, but he didn't turn around. "Go to your Apache. See how long his love lasts when you're cold and hungry, and there's nothing between you and the world but pride." Eliza stood frozen, waiting for him to take it back, to turn around, to be the father who'd taught her to ride and shoot and hold her ground. But Thomas Whitford had been hardened by war and loss and the brutal arithmetic of survival in an unforgiving land. He'd learned that weakness got you killed, that sentiment was a luxury, that sometimes you had to cut away the parts you loved to save what remained. "I'm sorry you see it as weakness," Eliza said finally, voice steady despite the tears on her face. "Loving someone enough to risk everything for them. I thought you'd understand. You loved Mother that way once." "Your mother didn't throw herself away on a man with no future." "No, she just died young trying to be everything you needed." Eliza's laugh was broken. "At least I'll die choosing." She walked out, leaving Thomas alone in the house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. And outside, in the last light of day, Eliza Whitford stood on the porch of the only home she'd ever known and looked toward the canyon where Kyle was waiting. She had a choice to make. Go back, apologize, accept Marcus Brennan and a life of comfortable suffocation. Or walk away from everything, safety, money, respectability, her father's love, for something as fragile and fierce as the feeling in her chest when she thought about a man who lived in the wilderness and looked at her like she was worth the world. Eliza had spent 24 years making safe choices. She gathered what she could carry, clothes, a blanket, her mother's locket, the rifle her father had given her on her 16th birthday. She took money from her own savings, enough to maybe last a few months if they were careful. And as the sun set over Salt River Canyon, painting the rocks the color of blood and fire, Eliza Whitford walked away from everything she'd known toward everything she'd chosen. Toward Kyle. Toward love. toward a future written in no language but their own. He was waiting at the cottonwood grove, pacing like a caged wolf. Kael had felt it all day, a wrongness in the air, a tension that made his skin prickle and his instincts scream warnings. He'd almost gone to her, almost risked approaching the ranch in daylight, but something had held him back. Now, seeing her walking toward him with everything she owned in a single pack, he knew why. "Eliza!" She dropped the pack and came straight into his arms, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. "He knows," she said against his chest. "He knows everything, and he told me to leave." Kael felt cold settle into his bones. "You should go back, apologize, tell him it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake." She pulled back, gripping his arms. "And I'm not going back." "You don't understand what you're—" "Stop!" Eliza's voice cracked. "Stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. I made my choice, Kael. I chose you. I chose this. Now you have to choose. Do you want me or not?" He looked at her. This woman who'd given up everything, who stood there with tear tracks on her face and fire in her eyes and absolute certainty in every line of her body. And he knew that whatever came next, whatever price they paid, he couldn't send her away. "I want you," he said hoarsely. "I want you more than I've ever wanted anything." "Then show me." She took his hands, placing them on either side of her face. "Show me where we go from here." Kael kissed her as the last light faded, tasting salt and determination and the wild, reckless courage it took to burn your whole world down for love. "We go into the canyon," he said when they finally broke apart. "Deep, where no one can follow. I have a place. It's rough, but it's safe. We can make it through winter there if we're smart." "And after winter?" "I don't know." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't know anything except that I'm not letting you go." "Good." Eliza's smile was fierce and bright. "Because I'm not going anywhere." They gathered her things and headed into the wilderness as stars began to prick the darkening sky. Behind them, the lights of the Whitford ranch glowed warm and safe and increasingly distant. Ahead was only darkness, and cold, and the uncertain promise of morning. But they walked into it together, two people who'd chosen each other over everything, whose love had become an act of defiance against a world that said they couldn't exist. And deep in Salt River Canyon, where the ancient ones had painted their prayers on stone and the land remembered every story, a new chapter began. One written in risk and faith, and the stubborn belief that sometimes, just sometimes, love could be enough to rewrite destiny, even if it killed them trying. The cabin Kael called home barely deserved the name. Eliza saw it for the first time in the gray light before dawn, after they'd walked through the night, through narrow passages between canyon walls that seemed to close in like teeth, across stretches of broken rock that would lose anyone who didn't know the way, up switchbacks so steep she had to use her hands as much as her feet. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, her boots were scraped raw, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But when Kael finally stopped and said, "We're here," she looked up and understood why no one had ever found him. The cabin was built into the canyon wall itself, tucked beneath an overhang of red rock that made it nearly invisible from more than 50 feet away. The front was constructed from weathered wood and stone fitted together with such precision it looked like it had grown there naturally. A thin ribbon of smoke would be caught by the overhang and dispersed, invisible against the rock. Water trickled down the cliff face nearby. A spring that ran year-round, Kael explained, fed by snowmelt from the high country. It was beautiful in its stark functionality, and it was smaller than her bedroom back at the ranch. "I know it's not much," Kael said quietly, watching her face. Eliza set down her pack and turned to look at him. This man who'd carved out an existence in one of the harshest landscapes on earth, who'd survived alone through skill and will and the kind of stubborn resilience most people never had to learn. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Relief flickered across his face, quick as lightning. "Come on, you need sleep." Inside, the cabin was simple but meticulously organized. A bed built into one corner, covered with furs and wool blankets. A small iron stove that Kael must have hauled up here piece by piece. Shelves carved into the rock wall itself, holding preserved food, ammunition, tools. Everything had its place, everything served a purpose. There was no room for anything that didn't earn its keep. Eliza sank onto the bed and was asleep before Kael had even pulled off her boots. She woke to the smell of coffee and rabbit cooking over the small stove. Afternoon light slanted through the single window, turning the air inside honey gold. Kael sat at the rough wooden table, cleaning his rifle with the same focused attention he gave everything. "How long did I sleep?" Her voice came out rough. 6 hours. He didn't look up from his work. "You needed more, but you were starting to shiver. Thought food might help." Eliza sat up, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders. Now that the exhaustion had receded slightly, reality was beginning to settle in. She'd left. Actually left. Everything she'd known, everyone she'd cared about, the entire architecture of her life, gone. And in its place was this, a stone room barely 20 feet across, and a man who was little more than a stranger in most of the ways that mattered. The panic must have shown on her face because Kael finally looked up. Second thoughts? Terrified thoughts. He set down the rifle and came to sit beside her on the bed, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching, giving her space to choose. "You can still go back," he said. "Your father's angry now, but he'd take you back. Men like him always do. They'd rather have control than be right. Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." "It's the only thing that matters." Eliza turned to face him fully. "Tell me the truth, Kael. Do you want me here?" He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving across his face. "Every day for the past month, I've told myself this had to end," he said quietly, "that I needed to be smart, to protect you, to do the right thing and let you go. Every single day." He reached out, fingers trembling slightly as they touched her face. "And every day I failed. Because wanting you here, wanting you anywhere near me, it's the most selfish thing I've ever done. But I can't stop." "Then don't." She leaned into his touch. "Be selfish. For once in your life, take something just because you want it, even if it destroys you. Especially then." Kael kissed her, soft and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've been alone so long, I don't know how to be anything else." "Then we'll figure it out together." Eliza smiled, trying for confidence she didn't quite feel. "How hard can it be?" The answer, it turned out, was very hard. The first week was a study in awkward adjustment. Eliza had grown up on a working ranch, so she wasn't afraid of physical labor, but there was a difference between mending fence and hauling water up a canyon wall in a bucket, between mucking stalls and learning to skin a rabbit without wasting any of the meat, between sleeping in a warm house with a kitchen downstairs and living in a single room where cooking, sleeping, and existing all happened in the same 20-foot space. Kael, for his part, moved through the space like he was still alone, forgetting to speak for hours at a time, startling when Eliza appeared at his elbow, clearly uncomfortable with the simple reality of sharing his carefully ordered world. "You don't have to do it that way," he'd say when she tried to help with something, then immediately add, "Sorry, I didn't mean you can do it however you want." "No, show me the right way," she'd reply, frustration edging into her voice. "I'm here to learn, not to be humored." "I'm not humoring you." "Then stop acting like I'm going to break every time I do something differently than you would." They'd stare at each other, both breathing hard, before one of them would apologize and they'd try again. But slowly, grudgingly, they found a rhythm. Eliza learned to move quietly in the small space, to read Kael's silences and know when they meant concentration versus discomfort, versus the simple peace of not needing words. She learned which tasks he preferred to do himself and which he'd accept help with. Learned that he woke before dawn every day without fail, that he checked the perimeter of their camp obsessively, that he never fully relaxed even here in his sanctuary. Kael learned that Eliza needed to talk through her thoughts, that silence felt like punishment to her even when he meant nothing by it. Learned that she was stronger than she looked, but too stubborn to admit when something was too heavy or too difficult. Learned that she had nightmares about her father sometimes, and would wake gasping, reaching for reassurance she was too proud to ask for directly. "I'm here," he'd murmur on those nights, pulling her close. "You're safe. I'm here." And gradually, the cabin that had been built for one began to feel like it held two. 3 weeks after Eliza arrived, the first snow fell. She woke to find Kyle already up, standing at the window and staring out at the white coating, everything in silence. "Is it bad?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around herself as she joined him. "It's early." His voice was tight. "We've got maybe 6 weeks before the heavy snows hit. Need to finish the winter stores." "What do you usually do?" "Hunt every day until the freezing starts, then preserve everything I can." He glanced at her. "But that was when it was just me. Now there were 2 mouths to feed, 2 bodies to keep warm, twice the risk." "Then we hunt," Eliza said firmly. "Teach me." Kyl's eyebrows rose. "You know how to shoot?" "My father made sure of it. I'm not as good as you, probably, but I won't accidentally kill us either." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "That's a start." They spent the next month in a desperate race against winter. Up before dawn, out into the canyon hunting deer, elk, rabbit, anything they could bring down and preserve. Eliza learned to track, to move silently through the brush, to read the signs that Kyle saw as clearly as written text. She learned to be patient, to wait for hours without moving until the shot presented itself, to make every bullet count because ammunition was precious and mistakes meant going hungry. She learned that Kyle was beautiful when he hunted, fully alive in a way he never quite was anywhere else. All hesitation fell away, all awkwardness. He moved like water, like wind, like something that belonged to the wild more than civilization, and she learned that she was tougher than she'd ever known. Her hands, which had been soft despite ranch work, developed calluses and scars. Her body, used to regular meals and warm beds, adapted to the gnawing hunger between successful hunts and the bone-deep cold of nights when they had to conserve firewood. She learned to ignore discomfort, to push past exhaustion, to do what needed doing because the alternative was starving. "You're good at this," Kyle said one evening as they worked side by side, preserving the day's kill. "Better than I expected." "You expected me to fail?" "I expected you to be scared." "I am scared." Eliza's knife didn't pause in its work. "Every day. Terrified, actually. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you have to be brave about doing it anyway." Kale was quiet for a moment. "Your mother teach you that?" "She taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what needs doing despite the fear." Eliza smiled, sad and distant. She was scared every day of her life, scared of losing the ranch, losing my father, losing me. But she never let it stop her from being exactly who she was. "She sounds like she was something." "She was everything." Eliza's voice went soft. "And I never told her that while she was alive. Too busy being angry that she expected so much from me, that she pushed so hard. Now I understand. She was trying to make sure I could survive, that I'd be strong enough for whatever came." "She did a good job." Eliza looked up at him, this man who lived every day on the knife edge of survival, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "So did your grandfather. You know that, right? He made you into someone who can build a life out of nothing but skill and determination. That's not something small." Kale's hands stilled in their work. "He also made me into someone who doesn't know how to connect, who sees trust as weakness and closeness as danger. And yet here you are. Connected, close, trusting me with your secrets and your space in your life." She reached across the workspace, covering his scarred hand with her own. "That's not nothing either." He turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together, and for a moment they just sat there in the firelight, 2 people who'd chosen each other against all wisdom and all odds. "I love you," Kyle said, like it was something that hurt to admit. "I know." Eliza squeezed his hand. "I love you too." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of more snow. But inside the small stone cabin, they had warmth and food and each other. For the moment, it was enough. But the world wasn't done with them yet. The first sign of trouble came on a bitter morning in late November when Kyle went to check his trapline and came back pale and tight-lipped. "Someone's been here," he said, immediately starting to gather supplies. "Recent tracks, maybe 2 days old. They got close. Too close." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "Who?" "Don't know. But they were looking for something specific. Checked the traps, studied the area. They know someone's living out here now. Could it have been hunters, just passing through? Hunters don't study ground that carefully, and they don't backtrack their own steps to hide their trail. Cale's jaw was tight. Someone's looking for me. For us. They spent the rest of the day securing the cabin, hiding anything that might indicate two people lived there instead of one. Cale showed Eliza a bolt hole he'd carved into the rock face years ago, a narrow crack barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, leading to a small cave where someone could hide if the cabin was discovered. "If anyone comes, you go there," he said firmly. "Don't argue, don't wait, just run." "And leave you? I can disappear in these canyons. You can't. Not yet." He gripped her shoulders. "Promise me, Eliza. If it comes to that, you run." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't abandon him, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This was terror, real and raw, the kind born from experience rather than imagination. "I promise," she whispered. But the promise sat bitter on her tongue. 2 days later, they had visitors. Eliza was inside working on repairs to one of Kael's shirts when she heard it. The sound of horses, distant but getting closer. Her blood went cold. "Kael," she said sharply. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. One look out the window and his face went hard. "3 riders, coming up the western approach." He turned to her. "Go, now!" "Kael, now!" Eliza grabbed the pack they'd prepared for this moment, water, ammunition, dried food, and ran for the bolt hole. The crack in the rock was terrifyingly narrow, the darkness beyond absolute. She squeezed through, scraping her shoulders raw, and found herself in a space barely large enough to sit. A thin shaft of light came through a crack in the rock, just enough to see by, just enough to watch. She pressed her face to the crack and saw them ride up, 3 men on horseback, led by someone she recognized even from a distance. Marcus Brennan. Her blood froze. Brennan sat his horse like he owned the world, flanked by 2 ranch hands she vaguely remembered from town. All 3 were armed. All 3 looked like they knew how to use those weapons. Cale stepped out of the cabin, rifle held low but ready. He looked small against the canyon wall, alone, vulnerable in ways that made Eliza's heart hammer against her ribs. "Help you gentlemen with something?" His voice was calm, controlled. Brennan smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. "You the Apache living up here like some kind of hermit? This is my land. You're trespassing." "See, that's where you're wrong." Brennan swung down from his horse with practiced ease. "This canyon belongs to Thomas Whitford, and Thomas Whitford has asked me to deliver a message." Cale said nothing, just waited. His daughter ran off a few weeks back. Stupid girl got some romantic notions in her head about frontier life. Brennan took a step closer. "Thomas thinks maybe she came looking for you. Thought maybe she saw you as some kind of noble savage. You know how women get these ideas." "Haven't seen any women up here." Cale's voice didn't waver. "Just me and the wildlife." "Is that right?" Brennan gestured to his men, who dismounted and started spreading out. Because funny thing, Thomas described exactly where she might go. Mentioned some cottonwood grove where he'd found tracks. Mentioned his daughter had been spending an awful lot of time supposedly fixing fence in areas that just happened to be near where you hunt. "Thomas Whitford's daughter isn't my concern." "Oh, I think she is." Brennan was close now, close enough that Kael had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. "I think she's here. I think you've got her hidden somewhere, filling her head with ideas about running away and playing house with a savage. And I'm here to take her home." "You're wrong." "Am I?" Brennan's hand shot out, faster than Eliza expected, grabbing Kael's shirt. "Then you won't mind if we search the area, just to be thorough." Kael's rifle came up in a smooth motion, barrel pressed against Brennan's chest. "Touch me again, and I'll put a hole through you big enough to see daylight." The 2 ranch hands had their guns drawn immediately, both aimed at Kael's head. For a moment, nobody moved. 4 men, 4 guns, all one trigger pull away from turning this into a bloodbath. Brennan smiled slowly. "There it is. The violence everyone says lurks in your kind. All it takes is a little pressure, and out it comes." "Get off my land!" "Or what? You'll shoot me? Kill a white man in front of witnesses?" Brennan's smile widened. They'd hang you from the nearest tree before sundown. And then who'd protect your little girlfriend? Kyle's jaw clenched, but he didn't lower the rifle. In her hiding place, Eliza pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Every instinct screamed at her to reveal herself, to stop this before someone died. But she'd promised. And more than that, she understood with cold clarity that if she showed herself now, Brennan would take her, and probably kill Kale in the process. "Last chance," Brennan said conversationally. "Tell me where she is, and maybe this ends without bloodshed." "I told you, she's not here." "Wrong answer." Brennan moved so fast Eliza almost missed it, stepping back into the side as his hand went for his own weapon. Kael's rifle tracked him, but the other two men were already moving, already firing. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Kale dove behind a boulder as bullets sparked off stone around him. He came up firing, one shot that caught one of the ranch hands in the shoulder and sent him spinning. But now Brennan had his gun out and the remaining ranch hand was circling, trying to flank. Kael was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in open ground. Eliza watched in frozen horror as he moved like water between the rocks, using every bit of cover, every angle. He was magnificent and terrifying and completely outmatched. Another shot from Brennan took a chunk out of the boulder protecting Kael. The flanking ranch hand was almost in position. In seconds, they'd have him caught in a crossfire. Eliza made a choice. She pulled the rifle from the emergency pack, checked that it was loaded, and squeezed back through the crack in the rock. The sound of gunfire was deafening in the canyon, echoing off the walls until it was impossible to tell how many shots were being fired. She emerged from the bolt hole into chaos. Kyle was pinned down. The wounded ranch hand was crawling toward his horse, and Brennan and his remaining man were advancing on Kael's position from two sides. None of them saw her. Eliza raised the rifle, sighted carefully the way her father had taught her, and fired. The shot took Brennan's hat clean off his head. Everyone froze. "The next one goes through your skull instead of over it," Eliza called out, voice steady despite the terror singing through her veins. "Drop your weapons." Brennan turned slowly, and the look on his face when he saw her was equal parts fury and something uglier. "Well, there she is." He didn't drop his gun. "Come on out, Eliza. Time to stop playing pretend." "I said drop your weapons." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Brennan's laugh was cold. "We both know you won't. You're not a killer, sweetheart. You're just a confused girl who needs to come home before she gets hurt. The only person getting hurt today is you if you don't leave. Now." But even as she said it, Eliza knew the math didn't work. Brennan and his man still had their guns. She had one rifle with maybe 5 rounds left. Kael was pinned down and wounded. She could see blood on his arm now, dark against his shirt. She'd evened the odds, but she hadn't won. "Tell you what," Brennan said, lowering his gun slightly in a show of false peace. "You come with me quietly, and I let your savage live. You stay here being stubborn, and I put a bullet in his head and tell your father we found you too late. Your choice." "Don't!" Kale's voice cracked across the canyon. "Don't you dare, Eliza!" But she was already moving, already lowering her rifle. Because what choice did she really have? Let them kill the man she loved, or sacrifice herself to save him? It was no choice at all. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'll go with you. Just don't hurt him." "Eliza, no!" Kale started to rise, but the remaining ranch hand's gun swung toward him. "Stay down, savage. You've caused enough trouble." Brennan holstered his weapon and walked toward Eliza with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Smart girl. Now drop the rifle and come here." She did, hating every second of it, hating the triumph in his eyes, hating her own helplessness. Brennan grabbed her arm, grip bruising tight. "Let's go home. Let me say goodbye." "No." He started dragging her toward the horses. "You're done with him." "Please." Eliza dug in her heels, and something in her voice must have carried weight because Brennan paused. "Just let me say goodbye, then I'll come quietly. I swear." Brennan studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Fine. 2 minutes. But if he touches you, I shoot him. Understood?" She nodded and walked toward where Kyle was slowly rising from behind the boulder, blood running down his arm, eyes wild with rage and grief. "Don't do this," he said when she got close. His voice was low, desperate. "Please, we'll find another way." There is no other way. Eliza took his face in her hands, memorizing every line, every scar. I won't let them kill you. I'd rather die than watch you leave. Well, I wouldn't. She kissed him, hard and fast and final. I love you. Remember that. Whatever happens next, whatever they do to me, I chose this. I chose you. And I'd do it again. Eliza, live, she whispered against his mouth. Just live. That's all I need. Then she pulled away before he could argue, before her resolve could break, and walked back to where Brennan waited with that smug, satisfied smile. Time's up. Let's ride. He hauled her onto his horse in front of him, and Eliza forced herself not to look back. If she looked back, if she saw Kael's face, she'd break. She'd fight. And they'd kill him. So she stared straight ahead as they rode away, leaving the man she loved bleeding and alone in the canyon, leaving behind the fragile life they'd tried to build, leaving behind everything except the bone-deep certainty that she'd made the right choice, even if it felt like dying. The ride back to the Whitford ranch took 3 hours. Brennan didn't speak, just kept one arm locked around her waist like she was cargo that might try to escape. The 2 ranch hands rode behind, the wounded one swaying in his saddle but grimly hanging on. Eliza used the silence to shore up her defenses, to build walls around the part of her that was screaming. By the time they reached the ranch, she'd gone cold and hard as stone. Her father waited on the porch. Thomas Whitford looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But his back was straight and his jaw was set, and when he looked at her there was no warmth, no relief, just grim satisfaction. Get her inside, he said to Brennan. We'll discuss the rest tomorrow. With all due respect, Thomas, we had an agreement. Brennan dismounted and pulled Eliza down after him. I brought her back. Now we settle the other part. The wedding can wait until... The wedding happens now. Brennan's voice went hard. Before she gets any more ideas about running, before the whole territory knows your daughter was shacking up with a savage in the wilderness. He smiled, cruel and cold. Unless you want that story getting around? I'm sure Marcus Brennan's reputation could weather it, but Eliza Whitford's? The family name? Thomas's face darkened, but he nodded. Tomorrow then. I'll arrange for the minister. No! Eliza's voice cut through the negotiation like a knife. Both men turned to look at her. No wedding, no arrangement. I'd rather die first. You don't have a choice, her father said flatly. Then kill me. Because I will never marry him. Never. She met Brennan's eyes, letting him see the absolute certainty there. I'll fight you every step. I'll make your life hell. I'll run the first chance I get, and when you drag me back, I'll run again. Forever. Is that what you want? A wife who hates you? Brennan's smile didn't waver. I've broken wilder things than you, sweetheart. Give it time. You'll learn your place. My place is with Kael. Her father moved so fast she barely saw it. 3 steps, and his hand cracked across her face hard enough to snap her head to the side. You don't speak that name in this house! His voice shook with rage. You don't speak of him. You don't think of him. You don't... He stopped, visibly controlling himself. You threw away everything for a man who can offer you nothing. Well, congratulations. You've learned what nothing feels like. Now you'll do what you're told. Marry who I say, and maybe, you'll salvage some scrap of dignity from this disaster. Eliza touched her stinging cheek, tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth, and she smiled. You can force me to stand in front of a minister, she said quietly. You can threaten me, hit me, lock me in my room. But you can't make me say the words. You can't make me mean them. And you definitely can't make me forget him. Father and daughter stared at each other, and something shifted in Thomas Whitford's eyes. Recognition, maybe, that he'd lost her in ways that had nothing to do with physical presence. Take her upstairs, he said tiredly. Lock the door. We'll deal with this tomorrow. 2 ranch hands, not the ones who'd ridden with Brennan, but men she'd known since childhood, escorted her to her old bedroom. They wouldn't meet her eyes as they closed the door and turned the key in the lock. Eliza stood in the center of the room that had been hers for 24 years and felt like a stranger. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The bed with its white coverlet, the wardrobe full of dresses she'd hated wearing, the window that looked out over ranch land stretching to the horizon. It was beautiful and suffocating and utterly wrong. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, looking out toward the distant canyon where Kael was, where he was bleeding and alone and probably doing something reckless to try to get her back. "Don't," she whispered to the night. "Please don't. Just live. Just stay alive." Because as long as he was alive, there was hope. As long as they both drew breath, this wasn't over. And Eliza Whitford had never been good at accepting defeat. She'd made her choice in that canyon. Now she just had to figure out how to live with it. Or better yet, how to fight her way back to the man she'd chosen. The night stretched long and cold ahead, full of uncertainty and fear and the iron determination that had carried her this far. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, alone in her locked room, Eliza touched the place where Kael had kissed her and promised herself that this wasn't the end. It was just a different kind of beginning. The morning came too soon, pale light creeping through the window like an unwelcome guest. Eliza hadn't slept, had spent the hours pacing, testing the door, examining the window for any possible escape route. The drop was 20 feet to hard ground, and even if she survived the fall without breaking an ankle, there were ranch hands posted around the house. She'd seen their shadows moving in the darkness, heard their low voices. Her father was taking no chances. At dawn, someone knocked on the door. The key turned, and a woman Eliza didn't recognize entered carrying a tray of food and a dress bag. "Your father wants you presentable," the woman said, avoiding eye contact. She was young, Mexican, probably one of the kitchen staff. "Eat something. Get cleaned up. The minister arrives at 10. "I'm not marrying Marcus Brennan." The woman flinched but didn't respond, just set down the tray and hung the dress bag on the wardrobe door. It was a wedding dress. White silk. Probably expensive. Absolutely hideous to Eliza's eyes. "Please," Eliza said, trying a different approach. "What's your name?" "Rosa." "Rosa, listen to me. They're forcing me into this. I don't want to marry him. I need help." Rosa's hands twisted in her apron, and for a moment Eliza thought she'd found an ally. Then the woman shook her head. "I'm sorry. I can't." She moved toward the door. "Mr. Whitford, he pays my wages. My family, we need the work. I can't risk it." "I understand. I do. But if you eat and dress yourself, they won't make me force you." Rosa's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be." She left before Eliza could respond, locking the door behind her. Eliza stared at the wedding dress like it was a coiled snake. Every instinct screamed at her to tear it to pieces, to barricade the door, to fight with everything she had. But she was trapped, truly trapped, in ways she hadn't been even when living in Kael's small canyon cabin. Because at least there, she'd had choice, had freedom, had love. Here, she had only walls and locked doors and a future being written by men who saw her as property to be traded. She touched the food, fresh bread, eggs, coffee, and her stomach turned. How could she eat when Kael was out there somewhere, wounded and alone? When he was probably doing something desperate and stupid to try to reach her? The thought of him hurt was worse than any fear about her own situation. Eliza walked to the window and looked out toward the distant canyon, barely visible as a dark line against the horizon. The sun was rising behind it, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded her of the first morning she'd woken in Kael's cabin, how the light had turned everything to honey and promise. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and made herself a promise. She would survive this day, would get through it by any means necessary, and then she would find her way back to him, whatever it took. An hour later, Rosa returned with 2 ranch hands. Eliza was still in her trail-dusty clothes from the day before, the wedding dress untouched. "Miss Whitford, please," Rosa pleaded. "Don't make them—" "It's fine." Eliza's voice was calm, almost eerily so. "I'll dress myself. But I need privacy." The ranch hands exchanged glances. The older one, Jim, who'd worked for her father for 15 years, cleared his throat. 5 minutes. Then we're coming in whether you're ready or not." They left, and Eliza moved quickly. She couldn't escape, but she could control one thing. She would face whatever came next on her own terms. She washed quickly in the basin, scrubbing away the dust and blood in fear. Then she opened the wardrobe and pulled out not the wedding dress, but the simplest dress she owned. Dark blue cotton, practical. The kind of thing she'd worn when she first met Kyle by the creek. She braided her hair the way she'd learned to do in the canyon, efficient and out of the way. No jewelry, no artifice. Just herself, stripped down to essentials. When the ranch hands returned, they stared. "That's not," Jim started. "It's what I'm wearing," Eliza said flatly. "Tell my father if he wants me in white silk, he can drag me down the aisle himself. This is his only other option." They didn't argue. Maybe they saw something in her face that warned them it would be pointless. Or maybe they were just tired of being part of this ugliness. They escorted her downstairs. The parlor had been transformed into something approximating a chapel. Chairs arranged in rows, flowers on every surface, the smell of furniture polish and desperation thick in the air. A handful of people had gathered, neighboring ranchers, town officials, people whose presence here was more about bearing witness than celebrating. And at the front, next to a thin, nervous-looking minister, stood Marcus Brennan. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, fresh clothes, hair slicked back, every inch the prosperous rancher playing the role of eager groom. But his eyes, when they landed on Eliza, were cold and calculating. "Well," he said as she was led forward, "not exactly traditional bridal attire, but I suppose we'll have to make do." "There won't be a wedding," Eliza said clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm here under duress. I do not consent to this marriage." A murmur ran through the small crowd. The minister looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. "Now, Eliza," her father's voice came from behind her. She turned to find Thomas Whitford in his best suit, looking every inch the respectable patriarch. "Don't make a scene. These good people came here to see you make an honest choice." "Then they're about to be disappointed," she turned to address the room. "I love someone else. I'm being forced into this against my will. If any of you have an ounce of decency, you'll stand up and say this is wrong." Silence. Not one person moved. Not one voice rose in protest. They were all complicit, all willing to watch a woman be sold like cattle because it was easier than standing against Thomas Whitford and Marcus Brennan. "See?" Her father's voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "No one's forcing you. These people are here to witness your choice. You can choose to be sensible and marry a good man who can provide for you. Or you can choose to throw your life away on a savage who will abandon you the first time things get hard. Kyle would never abandon me." "Kyle isn't here." Brennan stepped forward, and there was cruelty in his smile. "Funny thing about that. You sacrificed yourself to save him yesterday, rode away with me to keep him alive. And where is he now? Did he come charging after you? Did he fight to get you back?" The words hit like physical blows because they echoed the doubts that had kept Eliza awake all night. Why hadn't Kyle come? Was he too injured? Or had he decided she wasn't worth the risk? No, she knew him better than that. He was planning something. He had to be. "He's smarter than to ride into an obvious trap," she said. "Or maybe he's just smart enough to know when he's beaten." Brennan reached for her hand and she jerked back. His expression hardened. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Eliza. Your choice." "There is no easy way. I will never consent to this." "Then we'll do it the hard way." He nodded to the ranch hands. "Hold her." Jim and the other man grabbed her arms, faces carefully blank. Eliza fought, kicking and twisting, but they were stronger and she was outnumbered. "This is barbaric," she shouted. "You can't force someone to marry against their will." "The minister will perform the ceremony," her father said tiredly. "You don't have to say the words, we just need it legal on paper. After that, what happens between you and your husband is your business." The casual way he said it, like her whole future, her body, her life was just a contract to be signed, made bile rise in Eliza's throat. The minister opened his book with shaking hands. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The front door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. The wood splintered around the lock and Cale Redhawk stepped through like vengeance given human form. He was covered in blood, some fresh, some dried to brown, and his left arm was bound in a crude bandage. His rifle was gone, but he had a knife in each hand, and the look in his eyes was absolutely feral. Get away from her! The room erupted in chaos. Men shouted. Chairs toppled as people scrambled back. Someone screamed. The ranch hands released Eliza and reached for their weapons, but Kael was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, putting himself between Eliza and everyone else. One knife came up to point at Brennan, the other at Thomas Whitford. The next person who touches her dies, Kael said quietly. I don't care who it is. You're bleeding all over my floor, Thomas said, recovering quickly from his shock. And you just assaulted your way into my home. That's grounds enough to hang you. Then hang me, but not before I carve up anyone who tries to force her into that marriage. Brennan's hand moved toward his gun, but Kael's knife shifted to track him and the rancher froze. Go ahead, Kael invited. See if you're faster than me. I promise you're not. Kael, Eliza's voice broke through the tension. You're hurt. Your arm doesn't matter. He didn't take his eyes off the men in front of him. I came to give you a choice. A real one. Not this theater of coercion. Finally, he glanced back at her. Come with me. Right now. Or stay here and marry him. But it has to be your choice, Eliza. Freely made. She already made her choice yesterday, Brennan said. She chose to leave you. To save my life. There's a difference. Kael's voice was steady, despite the blood dripping from his arm onto the expensive carpet. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she wants this life. Safety, money, respectability. So I'm asking, Eliza, what do you want? Every eye in the room turned to her. Her father, silently pleading for her to be sensible. Brennan, confident she'd cave under pressure. The gathered witnesses, curious and judgmental. Rosa, standing in the doorway with something like hope on her face. And Kael, bleeding and dangerous and offering her freedom even though it might kill him. Eliza had spent 24 years doing what was expected, being dutiful, acceptable, safe. She was done being safe. I want you, she said clearly. I choose you. Always. She walked towards him, and Kael's whole body seemed to sag with relief even as his knives stayed ready. Think about what you're doing, her father said desperately. Once you walk out that door, you're dead to me. No money, no home, no family, nothing. I know. He'll get you killed, or worse, you'll starve or freeze, or then I'll die free. Eliza took Kael's hand, the one not holding a knife, and faced her father. I love him. I'm choosing him, and nothing you say will change that. Thomas Whitford looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the same iron determination that had made her mother impossible to sway once she'd made up her mind. Then go, he said, voice breaking. Get out, both of you. Brennan moved to block the door. She's not going anywhere. We had an agreement, Thomas. Let her go, Marcus. Thomas turned away, suddenly looking ancient. She's made her choice. Let them both go. Like hell. Brennan drew his gun. I didn't ride into that canyon and drag her back just to... He didn't finish the sentence because Kael's knife left his hand in a blur of motion and buried itself in the door frame an inch from Brennan's head. The room went absolutely silent. The next one goes through your throat, Kael said conversationally. Want to test me? Brennan looked at the knife still quivering in the wood, then at Kael, then at Thomas Whitford, who was pointedly not intervening. Slowly, he lowered his gun. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Eliza stepped forward, and there was steel in her voice. I will never be yours, Marcus. Never. You can force me to stand in front of a minister, but you can't make me a wife. You can threaten Kael, but you can't make me stop loving him. So ask yourself, is your pride worth dying for? Because that's what you'll get if you keep pushing this. Brennan's jaw worked, fury and humiliation warring across his face, but he stepped aside. Kael retrieved his knife and took Eliza's hand, backing toward the door with her. No one moved to stop them. They stepped over the broken threshold, out onto the porch, into the morning light that suddenly felt like freedom. Can you ride? Kael asked quietly. Yes. Then we run, fast and far. They'll come after us once the shock wears off. There were horses tied at the rail, probably belonging to the wedding guests. Kael helped Eliza onto one, then mounted another despite the obvious pain in his injured arm. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Anywhere but here." He kicked his horse into motion. "Everywhere, until we find a place that's ours." They rode hard, leaving the Whitford ranch behind in a cloud of dust and broken promises. Behind them, Eliza could hear shouting, could imagine the chaos as her father tried to maintain control, and Brennan raged at being denied. But she didn't look back, didn't let herself think about what she was leaving, the life she'd known, the father who'd loved her in his own limited way. The safety and certainty of civilization. She looked forward instead, at Kael's back straight and strong despite his wounds, at the open country stretching ahead of them, at the future they were galloping toward with nothing but hope and each other. They rode until the horses were lathered and heaving, until the ranch was far behind, and they were deep into country that belonged to no one. Finally, Kael pulled up near a creek, and they dismounted. "Let me see your arm," Eliza said immediately. "It's fine." "It's bleeding through the bandage. Let me see it." He relented, unwrapping the crude binding to reveal a bullet graze that had torn through the meat of his upper arm. It was ugly and half-infected, but not life-threatening if they cleaned it properly. Eliza used water from the creek and strips torn from her petticoat to clean and rebind the wound. Her hands were steady, though her heart was racing. "You could have died," she said quietly. "Coming for me like that, walking into a room full of armed men. I wasn't going to let them take you." "You should have. You should have stayed safe in the canyon and let me handle it." Kael caught her chin, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. Don't ask me to live without you. I can't do it, Eliza. I tried for exactly one night and it nearly killed me. Your arm is nothing compared to losing you." He pulled her close, careful of his injury. "When they took you, it felt like they'd ripped out something essential. Like I couldn't breathe right, couldn't think right. I spent all night planning how to get you back, and the only plan that made sense was the truth. Give you a choice. A real one. I already made my choice. I know, but I needed you to make it in front of everyone. Needed them to see you choose me, freely, despite everything." He rested his forehead against hers. "So they can't take it back. Can't claim I kidnapped you or forced you. You chose, in front of witnesses." Eliza realized what he'd done, the risk he'd taken, not just physically, but strategically. By making her choose publicly, he'd given her agency that no one could dispute. Whatever happened next, it was her decision. "You're smarter than you look," she murmured. "I have my moments." He kissed her softly. "Now we need to keep moving. They'll organize a search party, and your father knows these lands better than I do." "Where can we go that they won't find us?" Kael was quiet for a moment, then, "There's a place. 2 days hard ride north. It's rough country, dangerous in winter, but there's a valley my grandfather told me about, hidden, protected, with water and game. If we can reach it before the heavy snows, we might make it through." "Might?" "That's the best I can offer. Might." He smiled, but there was grief in it. "I'm sorry I can't give you certainty. Can't promise you'll be warm and fed and safe. All I have is might, and probably, and if we're careful." Eliza touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Then we'll be careful, and we'll make might into definitely." They remounted and rode north into country that grew wilder with every mile. The land here was broken and hard. Mesa tops and deep canyons, stone that held heat in summer and cold in winter, plants with thorns and animals with teeth. It was country that didn't forgive mistakes. But it was also beautiful in its harshness. The sky stretched blue and endless overhead. Hawks rode thermals in lazy circles. The air tasted like sage and possibility. They rode until dark, then made a cold camp in a box canyon with good sight lines. No fire, too risky with searchers likely behind them. They ate jerky and dried fruit from the saddlebags, drank water from their canteens, and huddled together under a single blanket as the temperature dropped. "Tell me about this valley," Eliza said quietly. "The one your grandfather told you about." Kael's arm tightened around her. He called it the place between. Said it sat in a fold of the mountains where 3 canyons met, protected from the worst winds. There's a hot spring that keeps it warmer than it should be, feeds a creek that runs year-round. Game comes through in winter looking for water. The old ones used it as a winter camp back before. He didn't finish, but Eliza understood. Back before his people had been scattered, hunted, forced into smaller and smaller pockets of land. Have you ever been there? No, my grandfather died before he could show me, but he drew me a map once in the dirt, made me memorize the landmarks. Kyle paused. I don't know if I can find it. Don't know if it even still exists the way he described, or if time and weather have changed it, but it's our best chance. Then we'll find it. Eliza said it with more confidence than she felt. That night, she dreamed of her father. Not angry or disappointed, but simply watching her ride away with the same expression he'd worn when her mother died, like he was losing something essential and couldn't figure out how to stop it. She woke with tears on her face. Hey, Kyle's voice was soft in the darkness. You okay? I heard him, my father. I saw it in his face when we left. I know. Does that make me cruel? It makes you human. He stroked her hair gently. You can love someone and still choose differently than they want. That's not cruelty, that's just life. He'll never forgive me. Maybe not. Or maybe time will soften him. Kyle pulled her closer. But either way, you made the right choice, for you, for us. How do you know? Because you're here. And you're not crying because you regret leaving. You're crying because love is complicated and messy and hurts sometimes, even when you make the right choice. Eliza pressed her face into his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and smoke and the wild spaces he called home. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Now sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard. He wasn't wrong. They rode through country that seemed designed to break travelers. The horses struggled over rocky terrain, picking their way through narrow passes where one wrong step could send them tumbling. They had to backtrack twice when canyons ended in sheer walls. Water was scarce. They refilled their canteens from a muddy seep that Kyle assured her was safe, but tasted like minerals and desperation. By the second day, Eliza's body was screaming in protest. Her thighs were rubbed raw from the saddle. Her back ached from sleeping on stone, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd been truly warm, but they pressed on. Late that afternoon, Kyle suddenly reined in his horse, staring at a distinctive formation of red rock ahead, 3 pillars leaning together like conspirators sharing secrets. I know this place, he said, voice tight with excitement. This was the first landmark. We're close. They picked up the pace, following what might have been an ancient trail along a ridge line. The sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of crimson and gold, when they crested a rise and looked down. There it was, a valley nestled between 3 canyon walls, maybe 2 miles across. Green showed even in late autumn, cottonwoods and willows clustered along a creek that cut through the center. And rising from the southern edge, a thin column of steam that could only mean one thing. Hot spring. The place between, Kyle breathed. It's real. They descended as the last light faded, leading their exhausted horses down a switchback trail that had been carved into the rock face generations ago. By the time they reached the valley floor, full dark had fallen, and a sliver of moon was rising. The hot spring was exactly where Kyle's grandfather had described, a pool of clear water surrounded by smooth stones, steam rising into the cold air like offerings. The spring fed the creek, which meant warm water even in the depths of winter. They unsaddled the horses, let them drink and graze on the grass that grew thick near the water. Then Kyle and Eliza stood at the edge of the spring, looking at each other in the moonlight. We made it, Eliza said, hardly believing it. We made it. Kyle pulled her close, and for the first time in days she felt him truly relax. This is ours now. Our place. No one knows about it. No one can take it from us. What do we do now? Now? He smiled. Now we build a life, starting with getting you warm and fed and safe. That night, they soaked in the hot spring until their skin pruned and their muscles unknotted. They ate the last of their supplies and made love under the stars with a tenderness born from having nearly lost each other. And when Eliza finally fell asleep, wrapped in Kyle's arms on a bed of pine boughs near the spring's warmth, she dreamed not of what she'd lost, but of what they would build here in this hidden valley. A home, a future, a love that had survived everything the world threw at it and would continue to survive whatever came next, because they had each other. And in the end, that was the only certainty that mattered. The next morning, they woke to find snow beginning to fall, soft flakes that drifted down like blessings and warnings both. Winter was coming fast, and they had nothing. No cabin, no stores, no preparation. Just two people, a hidden valley, and the stubborn belief that love could be enough to keep them alive. Kael stood at the edge of the spring, watching the snow dust the canyon walls, and felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. "We've got maybe 2 weeks before the heavy snows hit," he said. "We need shelter, food, firewood, everything." "Then we'd better get started." Eliza came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. "Tell me what needs doing." He looked at her, this woman who'd given up everything to be here with him, who stood in the early snow in borrowed clothes with nothing to her name but determination, and felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. "We start with shelter," he said. "There's a cave system on the north wall. I saw it when we came down. We can use that as a base, build out from there. Then we hunt, preserve everything we can, gather wood, make this place livable before the killing cold arrives. And we do it together." "Together," Kael agreed. They worked like people possessed, racing against the calendar and their own inexperience at living this far beyond civilization's edge. The cave Kael had spotted was perfect, high enough to stay dry, deep enough to hold warmth, with a natural chimney that would vent smoke. They hauled stones to build a wall across the entrance, leaving space for a door they'd construct from pine logs. Eliza learned to hunt with desperate speed, taking down rabbits and a young deer that Kael taught her to field dress without wasting any meat. They smoked what they could, dried the rest, used every scrap of hide and sinew. Kael ranged far in search of firewood, returning each evening with enormous loads strapped to his back. His arm was healing but still weak, so Eliza took on the heavy work of chopping and stacking. They barely spoke during those frantic days, conserving energy for survival. But at night, huddled together in their half-finished cave while wind howled outside, they would hold each other and remember why they were doing this. For love, for freedom, for the chance to build something that was entirely their own. 3 weeks after arriving in the valley, the first major storm hit. They were as ready as they could be. The cave was secure. They had food stores and firewood. The horses were sheltered in a lean-to built against the cave's southern wall. The snow fell for 3 days straight, heavy and unrelenting. It piled against their door, blocked the valley entrance, turned their green sanctuary into a world of white silence. And inside the cave, Kael and Eliza survived. They rationed food carefully, burned wood sparingly, and spent long hours just talking, really talking, the kind of deep conversation that only happens when there's nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. They told each other their histories, their fears, their dreams for what came after winter. "Do you think they're looking for us?" Eliza asked one night, watching firelight dance on the cave walls. "Your father? Probably. But they won't find this place, not in winter." Kael fed another small log to the fire. "Come spring, though, we'll have to be careful. Make sure no one tracks us here. And if they do, then we defend it, together." He looked at her across the fire. "This is ours, Eliza. Our place, our life. I won't give it up without a fight. Neither will I." The winter tested them in ways neither had anticipated. There were days when the food ran low and they went to bed hungry. Nights when the cold crept through every crack and they had to choose between freezing or burning wood they might need later. Moments when the isolation felt crushing and Eliza would cry for no reason she could name while Kael held her and promised it would get better. But there were also moments of unexpected beauty. Mornings when the sun hit fresh snow and turned the whole valley into diamonds. Evenings when they sat in the hot spring, stars blazing overhead in the clear, cold air, and felt like the only two people in the world. Nights when they made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with the patience born from having nothing but time. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they stopped just surviving and started living. Eliza learned to track animals through snow, to read the signs that meant a storm was coming, to make tools from bone and stone when supplies ran low. She grew strong in ways that had nothing to do with muscles, strong in spirit, in resilience, in the quiet confidence that came from discovering she could endure far more than she'd ever imagined. Kyle learned to share his space, his thoughts, his carefully guarded heart. Learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that letting someone in didn't mean losing himself. He taught Eliza everything his grandfather had taught him, and in teaching, remembered why survival was worth the struggle. By the time spring began to show its first tentative signs, longer days, the sound of water running under ice, birds returning from wherever they'd waited out the winter, they'd become something new. Not just two people living together, but partners. A unit. Something that worked because both parts were essential. They stood at the cave entrance on the first truly warm day, watching the valley come back to life, and Kyle turned to Eliza. "We made it," he said simply. "We did." She smiled, and it was full of everything they'd endured and overcome. "What comes next?" "We build," Kyle said. "Really build. A proper cabin. Better food stores. Maybe even start thinking about—" He trailed off, uncertain. "About what?" "A future. A real one. Not just survival, but a life." Eliza took his hand and placed it on her stomach, holding it there while she watched understanding dawn in his eyes. "I think we already started," she said softly. Kale went very still. "You're 3 months, I think, maybe 4. I wasn't sure at first, but now—" She smiled, nervous and excited and terrified all at once. "We're going to have a baby, Kale. We made a life, literally." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of something precious and fragile, and Eliza felt him shaking. "Hey," she said gently. "Are you okay?" "I'm scared," he admitted. "Terrified. I don't know how to be a father. Don't know how to protect both of you. Don't know if I'm strong enough or smart enough or—" "Stop." She pulled back to look at him. "You don't have to know everything. We'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else. And our child will grow up knowing what real love looks like, what it means to choose each other every single day despite the cost." Kale touched her face, his eyes bright with tears he wouldn't let fall. "I love you," he said. "Both of you. And I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I won't," Eliza promised. "Because this, you, me, the life we're building, this is what I was always meant to choose." They stood together in the entrance to their cave home, looking out at the valley that had sheltered them through winter and would shelter their child come autumn. And despite all the uncertainty, all the danger that still lurked beyond their hidden sanctuary, they felt something neither had expected. Hope. Not just for survival, but for a future worth building. For a family born from defiance and grown in love. For the chance to prove that sometimes the impossible choice is the right one. The world might still come for them. Thomas Whitford might still search. Marcus Brennan might still seek revenge. But here, in the place between, Kyle and Eliza had found something stronger than fear. They'd found each other. And they'd found home. Spring turned to summer, and with it came the hardest work either of them had ever known. The knowledge that a child was coming transformed everything. What had been sufficient for 2 adults suddenly felt desperately inadequate for a family. The cave that had sheltered them through winter now seemed too small, too rough, too exposed to the elements. They needed better, needed more. Kyle threw himself into building with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He worked from first light until dark fell, felling trees with an axe they'd traded for at a distant settlement, shaping logs with hands that blistered and bled. The cabin he envisioned would be solid enough to stand for generations. Thick walls, a proper roof, a stone hearth that would keep them warm through any winter. Eliza worked beside him despite his protests, her growing belly making every task more difficult, but not stopping her. She helped mix mud and grass for chinking between logs, gathered stones from the creek for the hearth, prepared meals that would keep their strength up through the brutal physical labor. "You should rest," Kale said for the 100th time, watching her haul another basket of stones. "I'll rest when the baby comes. Right now, we work." She set down the basket with a grunt. "Besides, I'm pregnant, not broken. My mother worked right up until the day I was born." Your mother had servants and a soft bed to collapse into. And I have you in a hot spring. Eliza smiled, wiping sweat from her forehead. I know which one I prefer. But as summer deepened and her belly swelled, even Eliza had to admit the work was getting harder. Simple tasks left her breathless. Her back ached constantly. And there was a fear growing inside her that she didn't voice, the knowledge that when the baby came, it would be just the two of them. No doctor, no midwife, no one who knew what to do if something went wrong. She caught Kael watching her sometimes with an expression that told her he was thinking the same thing. I won't let anything happen to you, he said one night as they lay together in the half-finished cabin, listening to coyotes call in the distance. You can't promise that. I can try. He placed his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move beneath his palm. I've been thinking. There's a settlement about 3 days' ride east, Mexican families, some Apache who married in. They might have someone who knows about birthing. That's too far. What if the baby comes early? Then we manage on our own. But if we have time, if we can plan for it, Kael's voice was tight with worry he was trying to hide. I want you to have help. Real help. Eliza turned to face him in the darkness. You're scared. Terrified. He didn't try to deny it. I've seen animals die giving birth, seen women in my grandfather's camp who didn't survive it. And the thought of losing you, of being alone with a baby I don't know how to care for. He stopped, swallowing hard. I can't lose you, Eliza. I won't survive it. She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. Listen to me. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Most of them survive. I'm strong. I'm healthy. And I have you. That's more than a lot of women get. But if something goes wrong, then we deal with it together. She kissed him softly. But I'm not planning on dying, Kael. I'm planning on meeting our child and watching you try to figure out how to hold something that small without breaking it. Despite his fear, he smiled. I am pretty rough with my hands. You'll learn. We both will. In late August, with the cabin nearly finished and Eliza too pregnant to make the journey herself, Kael rode east to the settlement he'd mentioned. He was gone 5 days, and Eliza spent every one of them fighting panic. She was alone in the valley for the first time since they'd arrived. Alone with her growing body and racing thoughts, and the very real possibility that Kael might not come back. He could be hurt, lost, captured by someone who recognized him from the Whitford ranch. But on the 5th day, he returned with a small, weathered woman riding behind him. Her name was Maria, and she was a grandmother 10 times over who'd been delivering babies for 40 years. She looked at Eliza with sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing, felt her belly with hands that knew exactly what they were searching for, and nodded. Healthy baby, strong, maybe 2 more months. She glanced at Kael. You did good getting me here. First babies, they can be tricky. Will you stay? Eliza asked. When it's time? Maria considered, looking around the valley, the half-finished cabin, the 2 young people who'd built a life in the middle of nowhere. I'll come back when you need me, she said finally. Your man, he knows where to find me. When the time gets close, he rides fast. I come quick. Understand? It wasn't a guarantee, but it was more than they'd had before. Maria stayed 3 days, teaching Eliza what to expect, showing Kael what to do if he had to deliver the baby alone. She was blunt and practical, pulling no punches about the pain or the danger or the sheer messiness of bringing new life into the world. You're going to scream, she told Eliza matter-of-factly. You're going to curse him, curse the baby, curse every choice that brought you to this moment. That's normal. Don't fight it. And if something goes wrong? Kael asked quietly. Maria fixed him with a long look. Then you save the one you can save. The mother always comes first. You understand me? She can make another baby. That baby can't make another mother. Kael's face went pale, but he nodded. After Maria left, the valley seemed quieter somehow. The reality of what was coming settled over both of them like a weight. They finished the cabin in early September. It was simple but solid, 1 large room with a sleeping loft, a stone hearth that drew beautifully, windows that could be shuttered against winter storms. Kael had even managed to make a cradle from cottonwood, carving it with shaking hands and fierce concentration. Eliza stood in the center of their completed home, one hand on her massive belly, and felt tears stream down her face. "Hey," Cale said, alarmed. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" "No, it's perfect." She gestured around the cabin. "This, us, everything we built, it's perfect." He pulled her close as her belly would allow, and they stood together in the home they'd made with nothing but determination and love. "I wish my mother could see this," Eliza whispered. "See that I chose right, that I'm happy." "She knows," Kyle said. "Wherever she is, she knows." But happiness, they were learning, was never safe from the world's intrusion. In late September, with Eliza so pregnant she could barely walk, they had unexpected visitors. Kyle saw them first, 3 riders approaching from the south, following the creek up into the valley. His blood went cold. "Eliza, inside, now." She didn't argue, just moved as quickly as her swollen body would allow. Kyle grabbed his rifle and positioned himself in the cabin doorway, watching the riders approach. As they got closer, his stomach dropped. The lead rider was Marcus Brennan. The rancher looked older, harder, like the months since their last encounter had stripped away any pretense of civility. The 2 men with him were strangers, hired guns by the look of them, with cold eyes and hands that rested easy on their weapons. They stopped 30 feet from the cabin, and Brennan surveyed the valley with an expression of disgust. "So this is what she gave up everything for," he called out. "A shack in the middle of nowhere with a savage for company." "Turn around and leave," Kyle said quietly. "While you still can." "I don't think so. See, I've spent the better part of a year searching for Thomas Whitford's daughter, promised him I'd bring her home safe." Brennan's smile was cruel. "And I always keep my promises. She's not going anywhere. That's not your decision to make." Brennan gestured, and his 2 men spread out, flanking the cabin. "Now, you can make this easy and send her out, or we can make it hard. Your choice." From inside the cabin, Eliza's voice rang out clear and strong. "I'm not going with you, Marcus. Not now, not ever." Brennan's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're saying. Your father's dying, Eliza. Lung sickness. He's asking for you." The words hit like bullets. Eliza appeared in the doorway despite Kael's attempt to stop her, one hand braced against the frame, the other on her belly. Brennan's eyes widened when he saw how pregnant she was. "Jesus Christ, he got you with child?" "We're having a baby. Together. Because we love each other." Eliza's voice shook but held. "And even if my father is dying, I won't leave Kyle. Tell him I'm sorry, but my place is here." "Your place is with your family." "Kyle is my family." She moved to stand beside him, and together they faced down the 3 armed men. "This baby is my family. What we've built here, this is my family. Not that ranch. Not that life." "You selfish little—" Brennan's control snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Your father built that ranch for you. Everything he did was to give you a future, and you threw it away for one night of passion with—" "Careful," Kyle interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." One of the hired guns drew his weapon, then the other. Brennan followed suit, and suddenly 3 guns were pointed at Kyle and Eliza. "Last chance," Brennan said. "Come with me now, or I take you by force." Kyle's rifle came up in one smooth motion, aimed directly at Brennan's chest. "You can try, but I guarantee you won't like how it ends." They stood frozen in a tableau of potential violence, 3 against 1, but Kyle had the better position and everyone knew it. If shooting started, people would die. Maybe all of them. "You really going to risk her life over your pride?" Brennan asked. "Because that's what this is. The second bullets start flying, she's in danger. Is that what you want?" It was a good argument, a smart one, and Kyle felt it land like a knife between his ribs because Brennan was right. If this turned into a gunfight, Eliza could be hurt. The baby could be hurt. But before he could respond, Eliza stepped forward. "You want to know what I want, Marcus?" Her voice carried across the space between them. "I want you to leave. I want you to ride back to my father and tell him that I love him, that I'm sorry he's sick, but that I made my choice. I chose Kyle. I chose this life. And I'm not coming back." He's dying, Eliza. Don't you understand? Dying. And he's asking for you. Then I hope he finds peace. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice stayed steady. But I won't abandon my husband and my child to sit at his bedside while he tries one last time to convince me I made the wrong choice. Because I didn't. This was the right choice, the only choice. Husband? Brennan's laugh was bitter. You're not married. Can't be. No minister would perform the ceremony. No law would recognize it. We married ourselves, Eliza said simply. Under the stars, by the hot spring, with the canyon walls as our witnesses. And that's more real than any ceremony you could have forced me through. For a long moment, Brennan just stared at her. Then he lowered his gun and gestured for his men to do the same. You're making a mistake, he said tiredly, but I can see you won't be convinced otherwise. He turned his horse. I'll tell Thomas I found you. I'll tell him you're alive and relatively well, but I won't lie to him about your choices. He deserves to know the truth. Thank you, Eliza whispered. Brennan paused, looking back one last time. For what it's worth, I hope you survive the winter. I hope your baby is born healthy. And I hope someday you realize what you gave up. He kicked his horse into motion. But I won't be back. You've made your bed. Now lie in it. They watched the three riders disappear down the valley, back the way they'd come. Neither Kyle nor Eliza moved until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then Eliza's legs gave out. Kale caught her, lowering her gently to the ground as she sobbed, great heaving cries that shook her whole body. He held her while she grieved for the father she'd never see again, for the life she'd left behind, for all the impossibly hard choices that love demanded. I'm a terrible daughter, she gasped between sobs. He's dying and I won't even go to him. You're not terrible. You're just making different choices than he wants. But he's my father. He raised me, provided for me, loved me in his own way, and I'm letting him die alone. Kale pulled back to look at her, wiping tears from her face with gentle fingers. He's not alone. He has the ranch, the hands who've worked for him for years, probably half the town sitting vigil. What he doesn't have is the power to control your life anymore. And that's what he really wants. Not your presence, but your compliance. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because if he really just wanted to see you one last time, Brennan would have come alone, unarmed, with an invitation, not a threat. Kyle helped her stand, supporting her weight. He sent 3 armed men to drag you back by force. That's not love, Eliza. That's possession. She knew he was right, had known it the moment she saw Brennan's face, saw the calculation in his eyes. This hadn't been about a father's dying wish. It had been one last attempt to bring her to heel, but knowing it didn't make it hurt less. That night she went into labor. It started as a dull ache in her lower back that Eliza tried to ignore. They'd been through an emotional ordeal, probably just stress, she told herself. It would pass. But the ache intensified, spread, became cramping that took her breath away. Kyle, she managed, I think it's time. He went pale. Now? The baby's not due for another month at least. Try telling the baby that. Another cramp hit and she doubled over, gripping the table. You need to ride. Get Maria. Fast. Kyle was already moving, torn between the need to help her and the need to get help. I can't leave you alone. What if... I'll be fine for a few hours. Women do this all the time. She tried to smile through the pain. Go. Ride like hell. I'll still be here when you get back. He kissed her hard, desperately, then ran for the horse. Eliza watched him disappear into the darkness and tried not to panic. First babies took time, she reminded herself. Maria had said that. Hours. Sometimes a whole day. She had time. But this baby, it seemed, had inherited its parents' impatience. The contractions came faster than they should have, harder than she'd expected. Eliza tried to remember everything Maria had taught her. Walk when you can, rest when you must, breathe through the pain. But the pain was consuming, a force that took over her entire body and left no room for thought or memory or anything but survival. She lost track of time. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together in waves of agony punctuated by brief respites where she could catch her breath and wonder if she was going to die. She thought about her mother, who'd done this to bring Eliza into the world. Wondered if she'd been this scared, this overwhelmed. Wished desperately that she could have one more conversation, ask one more question, hear one more time that she was strong enough to survive this. The urge to push came suddenly, overwhelming, undeniable. No, not yet. It was too soon. Kael wasn't back. Maria wasn't here. She was alone and unprepared and terrified. But her body didn't care about timing or readiness. It had its own agenda. Eliza half crawled to the bed, pulling herself up with shaking arms. The next contraction hit like a freight train, and she screamed, primal and raw, a sound she didn't recognize as coming from her own throat. And then she was pushing, her body taking over completely, and there was nothing to do but surrender to it. She didn't hear the door open, didn't know Kael had returned until his hands were on her, his voice in her ear. I'm here. I'm here, Eliza. You're not alone. The baby? She gasped. It's coming now. Can't stop it. Then we don't stop it. His voice was steadier than she expected. We do this together, like everything else. Maria's voice cut through the chaos. Move aside, boy. Let me see what we're working with. Eliza had never been so grateful to hear anyone in her life. The old midwife took one look, nodded, and got to work with calm efficiency. Baby's coming fast. That's good. Means strong, healthy. But you need to listen to me, girl. When I say push, you push. When I say stop, you stop. Understand? Eliza nodded, beyond words now. The next hour was a blur of pain and effort and Maria's steady commands. Kael stayed by Eliza's head, letting her grip his hands hard enough to leave bruises, whispering encouragement when she had breath to hear it. And then, just when Eliza thought she couldn't take anymore, couldn't push one more time, couldn't survive another second, a baby's cry split the air. It's a girl, Maria announced, wrapping the tiny, squalling thing in clean cloth. Small, but strong, good lungs. Eliza reached for her daughter with shaking hands, and when Maria placed the baby on her chest, everything else fell away. The pain, the fear, the exhaustion. None of it mattered compared to the tiny, perfect human she'd just brought into the world. The baby had Kael's dark hair and Eliza's gray eyes and lungs that proved she was very unhappy about being evicted from her warm home. She was beautiful and terrifying and everything. Kael stared at his daughter like he'd never seen anything so miraculous, one finger tentatively touching her impossibly small hand. When she gripped it reflexively, his eyes filled with tears. She's perfect, he whispered. She's ours, Eliza corrected, smiling despite her exhaustion. Maria worked efficiently, tending to Eliza, making sure everything was as it should be. When she was satisfied, she nodded. You did good, both of you. Baby's healthy, Mama's going to be fine with rest. You got lucky. Babies that come fast can be dangerous, but this one knew what she was doing. How long will you stay? Kael asked. Few days. Make sure no fever, no bleeding. Teach you how to care for her. Maria studied them both, two young people who'd just become parents in the middle of the wilderness with no safety net and no guarantees. You're going to be fine. I can see it. This baby, she's born from stubborn parents. She'll be stubborn too. Over the next few days, Maria taught them everything. How to nurse, how to change cloth diapers, how to swaddle the baby so she felt secure, how to tell if she was sick or just fussy. Kael absorbed every lesson with fierce concentration, terrified of making a mistake. Eliza, meanwhile, fell into motherhood with a naturalness that surprised her. The baby, they'd named her Sarah, after Eliza's mother, seemed to know when she was in her mother's arms, would calm from screaming to cooing in seconds. She knows you, Maria said approvingly. That's good, strong bond. When Maria finally left, promising to return in the spring to check on them, Kael and Eliza were alone with their daughter. The first few weeks were a special kind of hell. Sarah had her days and nights confused, crying for hours during the dark and sleeping peacefully when the sun was up. Eliza was exhausted beyond measure, her body still healing from the trauma of birth. Kael tried to help but felt useless when the baby wanted nothing but her mother. They survived on love and stubbornness, and the occasional moment of pure joy when Sarah would look at them with those gray eyes and seem to really see them. But survival was getting harder in other ways. Winter came early that year, and with it came a cold that seemed determined to kill. Their food stores, adequate for two, were stretched thin, feeding a nursing mother who needed extra calories. Firewood that should have lasted until spring was running low by January, and then Eliza got sick. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it deepened, settled into her chest, and refused to leave. She tried to hide it from Kael, tried to keep nursing Sarah, but eventually her body gave out. Kael found her collapsed by the fire one morning, fever burning through her, Sarah screaming in her cradle. Terror like he'd never known gripped him. He'd survived alone, survived war, survived every hardship the wilderness could throw at him. But the thought of losing Eliza, of being alone with a baby he didn't know how to care for, paralyzed him. For exactly 1 minute, he let himself feel the fear. Then he shoved it down and got to work. He made Eliza as comfortable as possible, forced fluids down her throat when she could swallow, bathed her with cool water when the fever spiked. And when Sarah cried because she was hungry and her mother couldn't feed her, Kael did something desperate. He remembered Maria mentioning that babies could drink goat's milk if necessary. They didn't have a goat, but they had stored deer milk from a doe he'd caught in spring. It was a long shot, probably wouldn't work, but it was all he had. He heated the milk carefully, let it cool, and dripped it into Sarah's mouth from a clean cloth. She sputtered, cried, but she swallowed. Over the next 3 days, Kael became both father and mother. He tended Eliza, fed Sarah, kept the fire going, and prayed to every spirit his grandfather had ever told him about that his family would survive. On the 4th day, Eliza's fever broke. She woke to find Kael asleep in the chair beside the bed, Sarah tucked against his chest, wrapped in his shirt. Both of them looked exhausted and absolutely beautiful. "Kael," she whispered. He jerked awake, and relief flooded his face when he saw her eyes were clear. "You're back," he said roughly. "You're really back." "How long was I?" 4 days. Worst 4 days of my life." He looked down at Sarah. "She missed you. Wouldn't settle for more than a few minutes at a time. You kept her alive." "Barely. I don't know what I'm doing, Eliza. Every time she cries, I panic. Every time she sleeps too long, I think she's stopped breathing. I'm terrible at this." Eliza reached for her daughter, and Kael placed her gently in her mother's arms. Sarah made a small sound and nuzzled against Eliza's chest, already searching for food. "You're not terrible," Eliza said softly. "You're learning. We both are. And we're doing it together." Kael slumped in the chair, exhaustion finally catching up to him. "I was so scared. When you wouldn't wake up, when the fever kept climbing, I thought—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought I'd lost you, and I realized that everything, all of this, the valley, the cabin, even Sarah, none of it matters without you." "Well, I'm not going anywhere." She smiled weakly. "You're stuck with me." "Good, because I love you too much to survive losing you." They sat together in the pale winter light, new parents who'd just survived their first real crisis, and felt something shift between them. They weren't just lovers anymore, or even just partners. They were a family, bound by blood and choice, and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built. The rest of winter tested them in smaller ways, but they made it through. Spring came eventually, bringing with it green grass and running water and the end of the hardest season of their lives. Maria returned as promised, pronounced Sarah healthy and thriving, and gave Eliza a long look. "You survived," she said simply. "We did." Many don't. First baby, middle of nowhere, sickness on top of it. Maria touched Sarah's dark hair gently. "But you're strong, both of you. This baby, she's got good parents." "We're trying," Kael said. "That's all you can do. Try. Love them. Keep them safe." Maria prepared to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Word in the settlements, Thomas Whitford died 2 months ago. Peaceful, in his sleep." Eliza felt the news hit like a physical blow. Her father, dead, and she hadn't been there. "Did he—" she started, then stopped. "Did he say anything? About me?" Maria hesitated, then decided on truth. "He told people his daughter died years ago, but his last words—" She met Eliza's eyes. "He said, 'Tell her I understand. Make of that what you will.'" After Maria left, Eliza stood in the cabin doorway, Sarah in her arms, and let herself grieve. Not just for her father, but for the relationship they'd never had, the forgiveness they'd never spoken, all the complicated love that had existed between impossible expectations. Kael came to stand beside her, silent support. He understood, Eliza said finally. In the end, he understood why I had to choose this. Choose you. Do you think he forgave you? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe he just finally accepted that I wasn't going to change. She looked down at Sarah, this tiny, perfect person who would grow up knowing love without conditions. But I forgive him for trying to control me, for sending Brennan, for all of it. He was doing the best he knew how. You're more generous than I could be. I'm a mother now. I understand how scary it is to love someone so much that you do anything, even the wrong thing, to protect them. They stood together watching the valley come alive with spring, their daughter between them, and felt the weight of the past finally begin to lift. They'd survived winter, survived sickness, survived grief and fear and every test the world could throw at them. And they were still here, still together, still building the impossible life they'd chosen. The hardest part they were learning wasn't the physical survival. It was surviving with your heart intact, your love fierce, and your hope unbroken. But they were doing it. One day at a time, one crisis at a time, one small victory at a time. And that, in the end, was all anyone could ask for. Sarah grew like a wildflower, resilient, beautiful, and completely untamable. By her first birthday, she was walking with the determined wobble of someone who refused to be held back by something as minor as balance. By 18 months, she was talking in full sentences that mixed English with the Apache words Kael taught her. And by 2 years old, she had claimed the entire valley as her personal kingdom, exploring every corner with a fearlessness that terrified both her parents. She's going to give us gray hair before we're 30, Eliza said one afternoon, watching Sarah chase a butterfly up a steep slope. She gets it from you, Kael replied, ready to sprint after their daughter at the first sign of danger. From me? You're the one who lives like every day is an adventure. And you're the one who gave up everything to chase what she wanted. He smiled, pulling Eliza close. She's got both our stubborn streaks. We're doomed. But for all the challenges of raising a wild child in the wilderness, they were happy. The valley had become more than a hiding place. It was home in the truest sense. They'd expanded the cabin, added a root cellar that stayed cool year-round, built better shelters for the small herd of goats they'd traded for. The life they'd carved out was hard but honest, built on work and love rather than money and expectation. They'd been undisturbed for 2 years, long enough to let their guard down, long enough to forget that the world beyond their valley hadn't forgotten them. The trouble started in late summer when Kael went to trade at the distant settlement. He took pelts and smoked meat, hoping to get cloth, ammunition, and maybe some medicine for their stores. It should have been routine. He'd made the trip a dozen times before. He came back 3 days later, pale and tense. "We have a problem," he said, dismounting quickly. "Where's Sarah?" "Napping. What's wrong?" Kael glanced toward the cabin, then pulled Eliza aside where their daughter couldn't overhear. "There are men asking questions in the settlement about an Apache living in the mountains with a white woman and a mixed child. They're offering money for information." Eliza's blood went cold. "Who? Brennan?" "No. Worse." Kael's jaw was tight. "Territorial marshal. Someone filed a complaint, said I kidnapped you, that you're being held against your will. He's got a warrant." "That's insane. I chose to be here. I know that. You know that. But to them?" He gestured vaguely toward the world beyond their valley. "To them, you're a white woman living with a savage. They don't believe you'd choose this. Easier to think I took you by force. Then we'll go to this marshal and explain. I'll tell him the truth. And if he doesn't believe you, if he decides I'm a threat anyway?" Kael's voice was bitter. "You think they'll give me a fair hearing? They'll arrest me, maybe hang me, and you'll be taken back to civilization whether you want to go or not." Eliza felt panic rising. They'd built something here, something real and precious. The thought of it being torn apart by people who couldn't understand their choices made her want to scream. "What do we do?" "We have options. We could run, pack up, go deeper into the mountains where no one will find us." Kael paused. Or we stand and fight, legally, I mean. You testify that you're here by choice, that I never kidnapped you. Make them recognize our right to live how we choose. And if that doesn't work, then we run anyway, but at least we tried. That night, they lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep, weighing their options. I don't want to run anymore, Eliza said quietly. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending we don't have a right to exist. Standing up to them is dangerous for both of us, for Sarah. I know, but what kind of life is she going to have if we're always running, always looking over our shoulders? Eliza turned to face him in the darkness. I want her to grow up knowing that her parents fought for their right to love each other, that we didn't let fear win. Cale was quiet for a long time. My grandfather used to say that sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to disappear. That survival is its own kind of victory. And my mother used to say that some things are worth fighting for, even when you might lose. Eliza took his hand. I'm not saying your grandfather was wrong, but I'm also not running, not this time. Then we fight. He squeezed her hand. Together. The next morning, they began preparing, not for flight, but for confrontation. Cale rode back to the settlement and found a man who worked as a lawyer sometimes, an old Mexican who'd seen enough injustice to be sympathetic to their cause. His name was Fernando, and he was blunt about their chances. The law doesn't like things it can't categorize, he said, studying them across his cluttered desk. A white woman married to an Apache? Living in the wilderness by choice? That challenges everything they believe about how the world should work. Can we win? Eliza asked. Win? Maybe not, but we can make enough noise that they have to actually follow the law instead of just enforcing their prejudices. Fernando leaned back. You'll need to testify. Be prepared to answer very personal questions about your relationship, your choices, why you left your father's ranch. They'll try to paint you as a victim or mentally incompetent. I can handle that. And you, Fernando turned to Cale, you'll need to stay calm no matter what they say. They'll try to provoke you, make you seem dangerous. You lose your temper, you lose everything. I understand. Good. Then let's go make some rich white men very uncomfortable. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later at the territorial courthouse in Silver Springs, a growing town 3 days' ride from their valley. Fernando advised them to bring Sarah to show the marshal that she was healthy and loved and clearly not suffering from her parents' choices. The ride to Silver Springs felt like traveling to another world. The landscape changed from wild canyon to settled farmland. They passed ranches and small homesteads, saw people who stared at them with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. A white woman, an Apache man, a small child who was clearly both. It was everything the territory was supposed to prevent. They stayed at a boarding house run by a widow who took their money without comment but made it clear they weren't welcome in her dining room. They ate in their room, Sarah too young to understand the tension, but picking up on her parents' anxiety. Why are people looking at us funny? She asked, her child's intuition sharp. Because they don't understand us, little one, Cale said gently. But that's their problem, not ours. Are we in trouble? We're going to talk to some people tomorrow. Explain that Mama and Papa love each other very much and want to live together. That's all. Oh. Sarah considered this. That's silly. Of course you love each other. Yes, Eliza said, pulling her daughter close. It is silly, but sometimes grown-ups make things complicated. The courthouse was an imposing building of red brick and white columns, designed to intimidate. They arrived early, Fernando meeting them on the steps with a grim expression. The marshal brought in Judge Whitaker. He's known for being harsh on what he calls moral degeneracy. Fernando glanced at Eliza. This won't be easy. Nothing about our life has been easy, she replied. We'll manage. The courtroom was already half full when they entered. Curious townspeople, a few newspaper writers, and sitting in the front row with a satisfied smile, Marcus Brennan. Eliza's stomach dropped. He's behind this. Probably, Fernando agreed, but we can't prove it. Focus on the hearing, not on him. Judge Whitaker entered, an older man with steel-gray hair and eyes that held no warmth. He surveyed the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Cale and Eliza with obvious distaste. This is a hearing to determine the circumstances under which Mrs. Eliza Whitford came to be living with the Apache known as Kyle Redhawk, he announced. The territorial marshal has received reports suggesting kidnapping and unlawful detention. We're here to establish the truth. The marshal stood, a lean man with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. Your Honor, we've received sworn testimony that Miss Whitford was last seen at her father's ranch approximately 3 years ago, shortly after which she disappeared. The Apache was seen in the area at the same time. Given the circumstances, we have reason to believe she was taken against her will. Fernando rose. Your Honor, Mrs. Redhawk is here of her own free will and prepared to testify that she chose to leave her father's home and live with her husband. Mrs. Redhawk? The judge's eyebrows rose. I see no record of a legal marriage. They were married according to Apache custom, Your Honor, which this territory recognizes under the Indian Reorganization Act. That act applies to tribal lands. This couple lives in unincorporated territory. The judge's tone was dismissive. I'm inclined to not recognize the marriage at all. Then recognize me as a free woman making my own choices? Eliza called out, standing. I don't need a marriage certificate for you to acknowledge that I have agency over my own life. The judge's eyes narrowed. You'll be given a chance to speak, Miss Whitford. Sit down. The hearing proceeded with agonizing slowness. The marshal presented his case, witness statements from ranch hands who'd seen Kyle on Whitford property, testimony from neighbors who claimed Eliza had been a dutiful daughter until the Apache corrupted her. Marcus Brennan was called to testify, describing how he'd found Eliza living in squalid conditions in the canyon and how she'd seemed confused and manipulated. Kyle sat through it all with his hands clenched in his lap, jaw tight, saying nothing. Eliza could feel the rage building in him, could see how much it cost to stay silent while men who knew nothing about their lives tore apart everything they'd built. Finally, it was Eliza's turn to testify. She stood before the judge with Sarah on her hip, her daughter clinging to her like a shield, and told the truth. She described meeting Kyle by the creek, choosing to spend time with him despite knowing her father would disapprove, explained how she'd fallen in love with him because he saw her as a person rather than property. Detailed the day she'd walked away from her father's ranch carrying everything she owned, choosing poverty and freedom over wealth and constraint. No one forced me, she said clearly. No one manipulated me. I made a choice, and I've never regretted it. Not when we were hungry, not when we were cold, not when I gave birth in the wilderness with no doctor. Because I'd rather have one day of genuine freedom with the man I love than a lifetime of comfortable captivity. You expect this court to believe, Judge Whitaker said slowly, that you willingly gave up a prosperous ranch, a comfortable home, and a respectable marriage offered to live in a cave with a savage? The word hung in the air like poison. Cale's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white, but he didn't move. Eliza lifted her chin. I gave up those things to live with my husband, to build a life based on love and mutual respect rather than economics and social expectation. If that makes me unusual, so be it. But it doesn't make me a victim. It makes you a fool, the judge said bluntly. Or mentally incompetent. No rational woman would make such a choice. Then perhaps your definition of rationale is too narrow. Eliza's voice cut like steel. Perhaps you can't imagine a world where a woman might value her own happiness over her father's business interests, where love matters more than money, where two people from different worlds can build something real and lasting together. Murmurs ran through the courtroom, some scandalized, some intrigued. Your Honor, Fernando interjected, the law is clear. Mrs. Redhawk is of legal age. She has testified under oath that she's here by choice. Unless you have evidence of actual coercion, this court has no grounds to interfere. The evidence is the absurdity of her choice itself. The judge's face was flushed. No sane woman— I'm sane, Eliza interrupted. I'm educated. I understand exactly what I chose and what I gave up, and I'd make the same choice 100 times over. The judge looked at her for a long moment, clearly struggling with the contradiction she represented. Finally, he turned to Kyle. You, Apache, stand up. Kyle rose slowly, every line of his body radiating controlled tension. Did you seduce this woman? Use any promises or deceptions to lure her away from her home? No, Your Honor. Kale's voice was steady. I told her the truth, that life with me would be hard and dangerous, that I couldn't promise her comfort or security, that loving me would cost her everything. She chose to come anyway. And you accepted that choice? Took her away from civilization to live like an animal? Something dangerous flickered in Kael's eyes. I accepted her choice because I respect her as a person capable of making her own decisions. And we don't live like animals. We live like human beings who've chosen freedom over compliance. Freedom. The judge's laugh was harsh. You call poverty and isolation freedom? I call loving who I choose freedom. I call raising my daughter to know both her heritages freedom. I call building a life on our own terms rather than someone else's expectations freedom. Kale's voice rose slightly. You want to call that savage? Fine. But it's my choice, and it's her choice. And unless you can prove we're harming someone, you have no right to interfere. The courtroom erupted in noise, some people shouting agreement, others outrage. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! I will have order. When the room finally quieted, Judge Whitaker looked at Kael and Eliza with an expression that mixed contempt with something that might have been grudging respect. This court finds no evidence of kidnapping or unlawful detention, he said finally. Miss Whitford, or Mrs. Redhawk if she insists, appears to be here of her own volition, however misguided that choice may be. He paused. However, I'm ordering a territorial investigation into the child's welfare. If she's found to be living in unsuitable conditions, she will be removed and placed with a proper family. No, Eliza's voice cracked. You can't take her. I can if I determine she's at risk, and living in the wilderness with, he gestured vaguely at Kael, with questionable supervision qualifies as risk in my judgment. Your Honor, Fernando stood quickly. That's overreach. The child appears healthy, well-fed, and clearly loved. You can't remove a child simply because you disapprove of the parent's lifestyle. I can if that lifestyle poses a danger, and I'm making that determination. The judge banged his gavel. Hearing adjourned. The marshal will arrange for inspection of the living conditions within the month. He swept out, leaving chaos in his wake. Kael and Eliza stood frozen, Sarah crying in her mother's arms because she could sense something was terribly wrong even if she didn't understand what. Marcus Brennan approached them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to tell you, Eliza, you can't fight civilization and win. Now you'll lose everything, including your daughter. We won't let that happen, Eliza said fiercely. You don't have a choice. The judge made his ruling. Brennan's smile widened. Unless, of course, you want to reconsider. Come back to town, live like a proper white woman, and I'll speak to the judge about dropping the investigation. Go to hell, Marcus. Suit yourself. But when they take that little girl and you never see her again, remember, I offered you a way out. He walked away, leaving them standing in the courthouse with their world crumbling around them. That night, back at the boarding house, they faced the hardest decision of their lives. We run, Kael said flatly. Tonight. We take Sarah and disappear so deep into the mountains they'll never find us. And live like fugitives forever? Always looking over our shoulders? Eliza shook her head. That's not a life for her. It's better than losing her to some family who'll try to erase half of who she is. Is it, though? Eliza's voice broke. Is running and hiding better than fighting for our right to exist? We tried fighting. We lost. We didn't lose. The judge said there's no evidence of wrongdoing. He's just ordering an inspection. If we can show them that Sarah is safe and healthy and loved, they'll have no grounds to take her. Kael laughed bitterly. You think they care about grounds? About evidence? They've already decided we're wrong. Nothing we show them will change that. Then we make them see different. We show them that love doesn't have one shape, that family doesn't have one definition, that our daughter is thriving because of how we choose to live. And if we're wrong, if they take her anyway? Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then we fight. Legally if we can, physically if we must. But I'm done hiding, Kael. I'm done acting like we should be ashamed of what we've built. He pulled her close, and they held each other while Sarah slept between them, blissfully unaware of how precarious her world had become. The next morning, Fernando came to their room with unexpected news. I've been doing some research, he said, spreading papers on the small table. Your father's will, Eliza. Did you know he left the ranch to you? What? That's impossible. He disowned me. Publicly, yes. But legally? Fernando tapped the documents. He never changed his will. When he died, the ranch passed to you as his sole heir. Brennan's been managing it, claiming you're dead or incompetent, but he has no legal claim. Eliza stared at the papers, her father's signature stark on the bottom of the will. A final gift or final attempt at control? She couldn't tell. What does this mean? K.L. asked. It means Eliza has significant assets, land, cattle, money. It means she's not a penniless vagrant living in the woods. She's a wealthy landowner who chooses to live simply. Fernando's smile was sharp. It completely changes the narrative. Hard to claim someone's incompetent when they're wealthy enough to choose poverty. I don't want the ranch, Eliza said slowly. I don't want any of it. You don't have to keep it, but claiming it, establishing your legal right to it, proves you're capable of managing your own affairs. It undermines every argument they have against you. They spent the next week fighting a different kind of battle. Fernando filed papers establishing Eliza's claim to the Whitford Ranch. They discovered that Brennan had been embezzling from the estate, skimming profits, and selling land that wasn't his to sell. When confronted with evidence of his fraud, he tried to flee, only to be arrested by the same marshal who'd come after Kyle and Eliza. The investigation into Sarah's welfare still proceeded, but now the inspector who arrived at their valley found something unexpected. He found a well-built cabin with a stone hearth and glass windows, found a root cellar full of preserved food, shelves lined with books, a child's toys carved with obvious love, found goats producing milk and cheese, a vegetable garden thriving in the rich soil, a hot spring providing year-round warmth. Most importantly, he found Sarah, healthy, bright, speaking 2 languages fluently, able to identify plants and animal tracks with the expertise of someone twice her age. She showed him her favorite spots in the valley, introduced him to the goats by name, and demonstrated how her father was teaching her to track deer. You made all this, the inspector asked Kyle, looking around the valley with something like awe. We made it, Kale corrected, pulling Eliza close. Together. The inspector's report was grudging but honest. The child appears to be thriving in an unconventional but stable environment. While the parents' lifestyle choices are unorthodox, there is no evidence of neglect or abuse. Recommend no further action. Judge Whitaker had no choice but to close the investigation. But the story didn't end there. Word spread about this couple who defied convention and won. Newspapers picked it up, some portraying them as romantic rebels, others as dangerous examples of social decay. The Whitford Ranch became a legal battleground as Eliza fought to reclaim it from Brennan's fraudulent management. In the end, she won. The ranch was hers again, free and clear. She stood on the porch of her childhood home for the first time in 4 years, Kyle beside her, and Sarah running through the rooms she'd never seen. Everything was exactly as Eliza remembered, and completely different at the same time. What do you want to do with it? Kyle asked quietly. Eliza looked around the land her father had built, the legacy he'd tried to force her to accept, and she made a choice he never would have understood. I want to sell most of it, keep enough to establish a fund for Sarah's future, but sell the rest. She turned to Kyle. And I want to use the money to buy the land around our valley, legally, so no one can ever take it from us. You'd give up all this? He gestured at the sprawling ranch, the wealth it represented. This was my father's dream, not mine. Our valley? That's ours. That's home, she smiled. Besides, someone once told me that freedom matters more than money. That someone sounds very wise. He has his moments. They sold the ranch to a consortium of smaller farmers, keeping only a modest sum for Sarah and using the rest to purchase thousands of acres of wild canyon land that no one else wanted, land that included their hidden valley and the mountains surrounding it. When the deed was signed and filed, Eliza held the papers and felt a weight lift that she hadn't known she was carrying. It's really ours, she whispered. No one can take it. No one can force us to leave. We're legal, Kyle agreed, wonder in his voice. Respectable landowners. Your father would have a fit. My father would be proud in his own complicated way. We fought for what we believed in and won." She looked at him. "That's all he ever wanted for me, to be strong enough to stand on my own. He just thought it would look different." They returned to their valley as summer turned to autumn, the seasons cycling through the way they always had. But everything felt different now. The constant vigilance they'd lived with for years had eased. They could plan for the future without fear that it would be torn away. Sarah grew, and with her came other children. A son, born 2 years after the hearing, who Kael named after his grandfather. Then twin girls who came early and small, but grew into fierce little wildcats who treated the canyon like their personal playground. The cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. They built a small schoolhouse where Eliza taught not just her own children, but kids from the distant settlements whose parents heard about the woman who'd given up everything for education and freedom. Kael taught tracking and wilderness survival, passing on the knowledge his grandfather had given him. Children came from miles around to learn from the Apache, who lived in the hidden valley and could read the land like text. And slowly, grudgingly, the world beyond their canyon began to accept them. Not everyone, of course. There were still people who whispered about the white woman and her savage husband, still those who thought their children were abominations that shouldn't exist. But there were also people who saw a family built on love, who recognized that different didn't mean wrong. Maria became a regular visitor, delivering babies throughout the territory and staying with Kael and Eliza whenever she was nearby. Fernando retired from law but remained a friend, someone who'd fought beside them when fighting mattered. Even some of the old ranch hands from the Whitford spread would occasionally ride up to the valley, ostensibly to check on the land, but really to see the girl they'd watched grow up and marvel at the life she'd built. Years passed. Sarah turned 10, then 15, then 18, a young woman who moved between two worlds with the confidence of someone who belonged to both. She could track a deer through the forest and discuss philosophy in 2 languages, could survive alone in the wilderness for weeks and hold her own in any drawing room. When a young man from one of the settlements asked to court her, she brought him to meet her parents with the same fierce determination Eliza had once shown. "He's respectful," Sarah said, watching her parents' faces carefully. "Kind, and he doesn't care that I'm mixed. He says it makes me more interesting." Kael and Eliza exchanged glances, and a lifetime of unspoken communication passed between them. "Does he make you happy?" Eliza asked. "He does." "Does he respect your choices? Your independence?" "He does." "Then we'll want to meet him," Kael said. "Properly. Not just as the boy who likes our daughter, but as someone who might become family." Sarah's face lit up. "Really? You're not going to tell me I'm too young or lecture me about being careful?" "Oh, we'll definitely lecture you about being careful," Eliza said with a smile. "But we won't try to choose your life for you. That's not what parents do. Or at least, that's not what good parents do." "You're the best parents," Sarah said fiercely. "You know that, right? Even when people said terrible things about us, even when it was hard, you never made me feel like I was wrong for existing." "You're not wrong," Kael said quietly. "You're exactly right. You're proof that love is stronger than fear, that family is what you make it, that different can be beautiful." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Kael and Eliza walked to the hot spring where they'd spent so many evenings over the years. The stars burned overhead, bright and eternal, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their marriage, the birth of their children. "We did it," Eliza said softly. "We built something that lasted." "We did." Kael pulled her close. Against every odd, every expectation, every person who said it was impossible. "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret that it was so hard. That you had to give up your father, your comfort, your safety. I regret that our children will always face questions about who they are and where they belong. I regret that the world couldn't just accept us without a fight. But the choice itself? Never." He kissed her softly. "Choosing you was the only thing I've ever done that felt completely right. Everything else, the struggle, the fear, the uncertainty, that was the price. And I'd pay it again. Every time." Eliza leaned into him, breathing in the scent of sage and smoke and the wild places that had become home. My father left me one final gift, she said quietly. Not the ranch or the money, something better. What's that? His last words. Tell her I understand. He finally understood that I had to choose my own path, even if it wasn't the one he wanted for me. That letting me go was the only way to really love me. Do you think he forgave you? I think he realized there was nothing to forgive. I wasn't betraying him by choosing differently. I was becoming who I was always meant to be. She smiled in the darkness. Just like Sarah will become who she's meant to be. And it might not look like what we expect, but that's okay, because we'll understand. They sat together in the warm water, watching stars wheel overhead and listening to the canyon breathe around them. Somewhere in the cabin, their children slept safely. Somewhere beyond the valley, the world continued to spin with all its complications and judgments. But here, in this place they'd claimed and defended and loved into being, there was only peace. Years turned to decades. Kael's hair went silver, Eliza's face lined with smile marks and sun damage. Their children grew and married and brought grandchildren who filled the valley with laughter and chaos. The story of the Apache and the rancher's daughter became legend in the territory. Some versions romantic, some cautionary, all of them missing the essential truth. It hadn't been easy or simple or without cost, but it had been real. On a golden afternoon in late autumn, when the cottonwoods blazed yellow and the air tasted like coming winter, Kael and Eliza walked to the old grove where they'd first met. The trees were taller now, the creek slightly different in its course, but the essence remained. This is where it started, Eliza said, touching the cottonwood where she'd sat crying all those years ago. Seems like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. We were different people. Better people now? Eliza considered. Just more honest. We know what we're capable of, what we're willing to sacrifice, what really matters. A rider appeared on the ridge. One of their grandchildren, probably, coming to tell them dinner was ready or that someone had gotten into trouble. The valley was never quiet anymore, never empty. It thrived with life and love and the sound of family. We did good, didn't we? Kael asked, watching the rider approach. We did. Eliza took his hand, weathered and scarred and still strong. We loved each other. We raised good children who became good adults. We built something that will outlast us. She smiled. What more could anyone ask for? Nothing, Kael agreed. This is everything. They stood together under the cottonwoods, two people who'd defied a world that said they couldn't exist and built a life that proved otherwise. Their love had been tested by fire and ice, by hunger and fear, and the crushing weight of other people's expectations. And it had survived, thrived even. Because it was built on choice, renewed every day. Because they'd fought for it when fighting mattered and held on to it when holding on seemed impossible. The rider reached them, Sarah, now a woman of 40 with children of her own, her face alight with news. I wanted you to be the first to know, she said, dismounting with easy grace. I'm going to have another baby, due in spring. Eliza pulled her daughter close, this fierce, beautiful woman who carried both their bloodlines forward into the future. That's wonderful. Does your husband know? I just told him. He's already planning to expand the house. Sarah laughed. He says 4 children need more room. 4 children need patience and love and a sense of humor, Kael said. The room helps, but it's not essential. I learned from the best. Sarah looked at her parents, these 2 people who'd given up everything to be together and somehow ended up with more than they'd ever dreamed. Thank you for being brave enough to choose each other, for showing me that love is worth fighting for. You don't have to thank us for that, Eliza said softly. We didn't do it for you. We did it for us. You were just the extraordinary bonus. Sarah rode back to the cabin, leaving her parents alone in the grove once more. Night was falling, painting the canyon walls in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere an owl called, and the creek murmured its eternal song. The valley settled into evening the way it had for thousands of years, indifferent to human drama but bearing witness nonetheless. Ready to go home? Kael asked. Eliza looked around one last time, at the cottonwoods that had sheltered their first kiss, at the canyon that had hidden their love, at the valley that had become their kingdom. I am home, she said. I've been home since the moment I chose you." They walked back together through the gathering dark, hand in hand, two people who'd rewritten what strength meant and proved that sometimes the impossible choice is the only one worth making. Behind them, the cottonwoods rustled in the evening breeze, keeping secrets and bearing witness. Ahead, the cabin glowed with lamplight and the sounds of family, children laughing, dinner cooking, life being lived fully and without apology. And in that space between what was and what would be, Kyle and Eliza had built something that would endure long after they were gone. Not just a family, not just a home, but proof that love, when chosen freely and defended fiercely, can transform the world. One heart at a time, one impossible choice at a time. One life built from courage and hope and the stubborn belief that different doesn't mean wrong. It just means brave. And in the hidden valley where three canyons met and the old spirit still whispered in the stone, their story became legend. Not because it was easy, but because it was true.